Testing. Testing 1, 2, testing. Testing 1, 2, 3, testing.
Hello?
The Subcommittee on Environment and Climate Change will now come to order. I recognize myself for 5 minutes for the purpose of an opening statement. In February, the subcommittee held a hearing examining President Trump's decision to withdraw the United States from the Paris Agreement. Since that announcement, states, cities, businesses, and universities across the country have stepped up to say they are still in, and they are not only making pledges, but are taking concrete actions. While this administration has failed to rise to the challenge of our climate crisis, others are leading the way in keeping our national emissions reduction targets within reach. Investing in infrastructure, in creating local jobs, and transitioning to a clean energy economy are goals that leaders on both sides of the aisle at all levels of government should be able to support. That is why 23 states have joined the U.S. Climate Alliance, and more than 400 local governments have joined the Climate Mayors Network, organizations that are helping state and local governments work together and encourage greater action. Today, we have a chance to learn from some of the elected officials now leading our nation's climate response. This includes a former colleague who served on this committee, being Governor Jay Inslee of Washington State. Thank you, Governor, and welcome back to the Energy and Commerce Committee. During his time here, Governor Inslee was a leader on clean energy and climate issues. He played a major role in developing the American Clean Energy and Security Act and in transformative clean energy investments included in the American Recovery and Reinvestment Act. He also co-founded the House Sustainable Energy and Environment Coalition. I was at that charter effort, and I now am proud to say that I co-chair today's efforts with SEEK. Governor Inslee, along with former Governor Jerry Brown and my home state Governor Andrew Cuomo, founded the U.S. Climate Alliance. The states in the alliance represent more than 1/2 of the U.S. population and almost 3/5 of the U.S. economy. I cannot think of a better witness to share the experiences of states transitioning to a cleaner, healthier, more competitive, and more sustainable economy. Local governments are also doing their part, implementing solutions to transition their communities and create good-paying jobs while doing it. Today we ask, what can Congress learn from our state and local experiences? And how can our federal government be a better partner in these efforts? This committee has established itself in recent years as a force for bipartisan environmental legislation, including drinking water infrastructure, brownfields redevelopment, and nuclear waste cleanup. And in every case, we started with these same questions. Our response to climate action should be no different. We are at a crossroads in the climate crisis. If we are going to meet this crisis head-on, we will need every idea and every proposal we can muster. I recently released a set of climate principles that should help guide our efforts in Congress to develop legislation. Before coming to Congress, I ran a state energy office and served in state and county government. I know how much work gets done at these levels. They do not have the luxury of burying their heads in the sand when climate change comes to their communities and threatens their constituents. It is falling upon them to harden their infrastructure and deal with increasingly frequent and severe wildfires, flooding, droughts, and air quality issues. These disasters jeopardize property values and undermine local tax bases. In some cases, they threaten future economic development and revitalization, especially waterfront development. We have seen the damaging effects of climate change extend far beyond natural disasters. It is hurting tourism, recreation, agricultural production, and other industries that many American communities rely upon. Empowering state, local, tribal, and territorial governments needs to be at the foundation of our climate response in Congress. State and local leaders are often in the best position to enact innovative policies to promote a cleaner economy and deal with climate damage. We also need to recognize that we live in a big country. Each state and region faces unique challenges. Program flexibility is indeed critical. Today, as we hear from mayors from across the country, we need to make sure they have the tools and resources necessary to meet their needs. Some solutions will be best suited for federal action, but a comprehensive approach will take all hands on deck. Other levels of government will need to adopt policies that work for their unique local conditions. A few of these locally driven programs may include efforts to strengthen community resilience, increase energy efficiency through building codes and energy benchmarking, improve the efficiency and operation of municipal buildings, and promote cleaner transportation options, including transit and pedestrian and bicycle infrastructure. But despite the exciting testimony we will hear this morning, let's not fool ourselves. Subnational action is not a substitute for greater federal leadership. America's response to the climate crisis needs to be a partnership, and currently the federal government is simply not holding up its end of the bargain. And with that, I yield back. Before we recognize our ranking Republican for the committee, the Republican leader for the subcommittee, I ask unanimous consent for Representative Gianforte of Montana to participate in today's subcommittee hearing, including the opportunity to ask questions of witnesses and submit a written opening statement into the record. I thought I heard a whimper, but we didn't. Without objection, so ordered. With that, the chair now recognizes Mr. Shimkus, our ranking Republican for the Subcommittee on Environment and Climate Change, for 5 minutes for his opening statement.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and welcome back, Governor Inslee. There's no question ever since your time on the committee that you have been a vocal, passionate advocate for federal policies to reduce greenhouse gas emissions. In fact, as I was thinking about our chance to visit today, you were for climate change before climate change was cool. You are trying to save the planet while I was trying to save jobs and the economy, and we served on some panels debating that years ago. And I also remember, I think you hit my slider for a double in the congressional baseball game, but don't tell anybody that. Some of your policies, ideas may not be supportable by our side of the aisle. The proposals may not even be supportable in portions of your home state. But you have thought about a lot about climate policy. We have worked well together in the past, so I look forward to your testimony this morning. Mr. Chairman, when we began this subcommittee's climate hearings at the beginning of February, I made a point that just because you agree climate change is a risk to address does not mean that you must accept unquestionably the standard Democrat and climate activist solutions to the problem. For too long, this has been a false choice in the policy debate, where if members question the cost and effectiveness of solutions, they are portrayed as not being serious about the problem. I would suggest that if we are serious about the problem, we should examine the cost and effectiveness of proposed policies. For nearly 30 years, the standard treaties and international requirements have not worked so well. In 1990, energy-related carbon dioxide emissions were 20.5 gigatons. By 2018, energy-related CO2 emissions had increased to 33.2 gigatons, or by 62%, according to the most recent report from the International Energy Agency. Between 2017 and 2018 alone, global emissions of carbon dioxide increased by 560 million metric tons, a half of gigaton. China's emissions increased by 230 million metric tons, or a little more than 40% of the worldwide increase. U.S. energy emissions also tracked up, but as IEA notes, despite this increase, emissions in the United States remain around the 1990 levels, which is 14% and 800 million tons of CO2 below their peaks in the year 2000. This is the largest absolute decline among all countries since 2000. The United Nations' own November 2018 emissions gap report states that nations will still have to triple their efforts to meet the Paris Agreement's basic goals. Yet, given the reaction to even modest targets in Europe and elsewhere and the realities of future fossil energy demand, this is not a realistic prospect. The point here is the scale of the global energy and industrial growth should put the effectiveness of our U.S. actions in perspective. The focus on the Obama administration's economy-wide emissions commitments does not appear to be a realistic solution to global emissions growth. Though enforcing the commitments here at home could create realistic hardship on our electricity, transportation, and industrial sectors in communities around the nation. We will hear today what states and cities associated with the We Are Still In coalition are doing to reduce emissions and take other actions to address climate change. I look forward to what we can learn, especially about preparing for future climate impacts. But I think we should pay close attention to the testimony of two of the elected officials who we will hear from this morning, Mayor Jerry Morales of Midland, Texas, and Commissioner Daniel Camp, who chairs the Board of County Commissioners in Beaver County, Pennsylvania, over the border from Mr. Johnson and Mr. McKinley's district in the upper Ohio River Valley. They provide powerful examples of what our oil and gas revolution in the United States has meant to communities in terms of tax base, quality of life, economic potential, and community and environmental health. These officials can testify as to what a focus on energy access, affordable energy, and embracing technological development can mean for the economic vitality of communities. Their experience is experience developing nations around the world are striving for, and which the U.S. should promote. The community, wealth, and security, the high-quality jobs and manufacturing prospects, the economic ability to strengthen infrastructure and protect communities from natural disasters are benefits that we should not abandon in the search of climate solutions. Instead, these are essential attributes we should embrace as providing the potential for continued innovation that will actually foster the technologies necessary to reduce the global emissions. And again, it's great to see you back. Welcome back to 2123, and I look forward to hearing your testimony and answering our questions. And with that, Mr. Chairman, I yield back my time.
Thank you. The gentleman yields back. The chair now recognizes Mr. Pallone, chairman of the full committee, for 5 minutes for his opening statement.
Thank you, Chairman Tonko. This morning, we're going to be hearing from elected representatives of state and local governments about what they're doing to address climate change, and their actions are more important than ever, considering the Trump administration denies climate change is happening and continues to push policies that will only make it worse. And I'm particularly pleased to welcome Governor Jay Inslee back to the Committee on Energy and Commerce, where he served with many of us while he was in Congress. You look good. You don't no less weary from being the governor. A lot of governors I meet, they like kind of deteriorate. But anyway, Governor Inslee's focus on climate change is not new. In 2002, he championed an Apollo-style effort to support technologies and policies to transition the nation to a low-carbon economy. And now, as governor of Washington, he's showing that addressing the climate crisis is not only good policy, it's good business. He also co-founded the bipartisan U.S. Climate Alliance, leading the way for other states to take meaningful steps towards fulfilling our commitments under the Paris Climate Agreement. Now, the mayors on our second panel reflect the dedication and ingenuity of local leaders facing the climate crisis head-on and the success of nonpartisan community-focused solutions. The impressive work of the leaders here today is heartening, but they can't address the magnitude of the climate crisis alone. They need the support and leadership of a strong federal partner. State and local government initiatives to reduce greenhouse gas pollution stand in stark contrast to the recent actions by the Trump administration. This administration is doing all it can to lean into more greenhouse gas pollution, more global warming, and a more uncertain and dangerous future for our country and the rest of the world. And scientists warn us that some of these impacts will get worse if we fail to act now. And the evidence is very clear, particularly to the communities on the front line of climate change. Whether they're represented by Democrats or Republicans, they're well aware that the costs of climate change go far beyond the cost to which we can attach a dollar figure. Now, my district is one where we were hit the hardest, I think, by Superstorm Sandy. And, many of my communities were devastated and haven't even fully recovered. I have to tell you, I have a lot of Republican mayors, council people, county legislators, and it doesn't matter whether they're Democrat or Republican. They all want us to address climate change. It is not and should not be a partisan issue. So today, as we sit here, there's record flooding in the Midwest, claiming lives and destroying homes, communities, and businesses that people spent a lifetime building. And those communities know that the time for debate and inaction should have been over long ago. State and local governments acting on climate change are positioning themselves as leaders in a new low-carbon economy. 17 states of the Climate Alliance reported last year that they attracted more than $110 billion in clean energy. And those are, obviously investments, create jobs. And they realize billions of dollars in public health and environmental benefits. Our nation has always been at the forefront in the creation of new industries, new technologies, and new jobs, and this committee has always been a leader, and we should strive to improve upon that record. Unfortunately, the Trump administration wants to take us backwards by withdrawing from the Paris Agreement. We simply can't allow that to happen, which is why Democrats have introduced H.R. 9, the Climate Action Now Act. This legislation would stop President Trump from pulling out of the Paris Agreement and require him to submit a plan for meeting our obligations under the pact. We'll be marking up that legislation tomorrow here in the full committee. But we can't stop there. I'd like to move legislation that will support state and local government efforts to address climate change and give members on both sides of the aisle an opportunity to help communities save money, create jobs, and cut their greenhouse gas emissions. So, Governor Inslee, it's not that we want you to just talk about what you're doing. We want you to give us ideas about what we can do to help you at the state and local level. And taking action on climate will lead to the development of new industries and new jobs and make our communities safer and more resilient. But again, as I said before, state and local governments can't do it alone. The federal government must be strong as a partner by expanding the use of clean energy and reducing fossil fuel emissions. And the scientific community continues to warn us about the dangers of unchecked greenhouse gas pollution. We have to heed their warning. We have the technology to address this problem, but we need to apply it more broadly and more aggressively. And state and local governments are demonstrating that it can be done, and we should join with them and reaffirm that the U.S. is indeed committed to acting on climate. So thank you again for being here, Jay. Thank you for all your leadership, both when you were here and now as governor. I yield back.
The gentleman yields back. The chair now recognizes Mr. Walden, Republican leader of the full committee, for 5 minutes for his opening statement.
Well, good morning, Mr. Chairman, and thanks for having this hearing. As you know, you and I have discussed Republicans are ready to willing to work with you on policies to continue America's leadership role in developing innovative technologies to produce energy with little or no emissions. Republicans are ready and willing to work with you on conservation, on innovation, on adaptation and preparation policies that help the environment and do not harm consumers. In fact, we have a pretty clear record of bipartisan legislation from this committee to do just that. Republicans have worked with Democrats over the past several Congresses to remove regulatory barriers to new technological advances in power generation, from hydroelectric power to small modular nuclear, from carbon capture and storage incentives to power grid reforms, because innovation is where the long-term solutions to climate change are. We want America to lead the world in innovation, as we always have, especially on clean energy and environmental cleanup. It's disappointing today that this hearing is really more about the politics of climate change than rolling up our sleeves and getting to work on domestic solutions. I can't recall a time in my more than 18 years on the committee where we've cleared the decks for a presidential candidate to come take center stage. Now, I want to join those in welcoming Governor Inslee back to the Energy and Commerce Committee room. We also served together on the Resources Committee. And as an advocate for the Green New Deal, I'm sure he would agree with me that it's time that this committee actually had a hearing on that legislation. Both of my senators signed on and were at the news conference when it was announced. And I know one of the biggest proponents, the new Congresswoman from New York, said it was unfair for the Senate to vote on the Green New Deal without first having had a hearing. So we should take note of her comments and schedule a hearing, Mr. Chairman, in this committee. Meanwhile, as I noted a few weeks ago, the focus on U.S. commitments in the Paris Agreement distracts from the work we could get done together. Certainly, many states and cities around the United States have made commitments to meet the Paris goals, but these commitments don't necessarily work nationally. However, I do believe this hearing will be useful to review some of the actions states and cities are taking to adapt and become more resilient to a changing climate. Now, in the great Pacific Northwest, we've benefited from clean hydroelectric power. We have wind power, we have geothermal power, and we have solar power, among other sources. And while our energy emissions are better than most, we've suffered greatly from the lack of management of our federal forest lands, which are burning up every summer, choking our citizens and polluting our atmosphere. Now, I know when Governor Inslee was in the House, we went toe-to-toe, and you opposed most of my efforts to get our forests back in balance and to reduce the threat of wildfires. Now, even in the United Nations Climate Change Panel, they called for active forest management. So hopefully, perhaps your views on these matters have changed as you read the IPCC reports from 2007 and beyond. After this hearing is behind us, Mr. Chairman, I hope we can work together, as we have in the past, to reduce the barriers to innovation and unleash the best and brightest among our citizens to develop new technologies to help confront the climate challenges of the future and put America in the driver's seat to lead those technologies and sell them abroad. Mr. Chairman, I'd also raise the issue that it's unfortunate the measure that we will mark up tomorrow was only introduced on Thursday, and it's unfortunate that your subcommittee, this one, does not have an opportunity to mark up that measure. that would be the regular order that you're proud of and I'm proud of, and I'm sorry we're not going to have that opportunity to have a markup on the underlying legislation. Instead, it's going to be taken straight to full committee and straight to the floor to meet some arbitrary deadline. So with that, Mr. Chairman, thanks again for having this hearing. We look forward to working with you where we can, and I yield back the balance of my time.
Thank you. The gentleman yields back. The chair would like to remind members that pursuant to committee rules, all members' written opening statements shall be made part of the record. Now would like to introduce our first witness for today's hearing, the Honorable Jay Inslee, Governor, State of Washington. We want to thank you, Governor, for joining us today. We look forward to your testimony. Again, I have to thank you for the inspiration you provided, not only in the House, but across Congress, to look at this with the climate change issue with great seriousness and approaching it in a scientific and evidence-based way. And thank you for leading us in that effort. Before we begin, I would like to explain the lighting system in front of our witnesses is a series of lights. The light will initially be green at the start of your opening statement. The light will turn yellow when you have 1 minute left. Please bring to wrap up your testimony at that point. The light will turn red when your time expires, and I'm certain you recall those days, but always a refresher course is helpful. At this time, the chair...
He never abided by them.
There you go. So, at this time, the chair will recognize the Honorable Jay Inslee for 5 minutes to provide his opening statement. And again, welcome, Governor.
Thank you, Chair Pallone and Tonko, Representative Shimkus, Walden, our Congresswoman Rogers. Thanks for having me. I can assure you, in the last 6 years, none of you have deteriorated at all from this event, except for the Shimkus fastball. That's lost 5 miles an hour, but that's another matter. I think I can share just at the top comment here 3 things that I think there's wide agreement on out in the states, if I can report. Number one, we recognize that we are the first generation to feel the sting of climate change, and we are the last generation that can actually do something about it. Number two, we recognize this is a moment of great peril, but it is also a moment of great economic promise with tremendous job creation opportunities that I'll talk about in a moment. And number three, I think we've decided, because the facts are in, there are a heck of a lot more jobs fighting climate change than there is in denying climate change. And that's good news for the United States. And I'll talk about that in success in many of our states in a few moments. So we do hope that we can help the federal government take a look at some of the actions that states are taking in the hopes that the federal government can join the states in really working to build a clean energy economy. So I hope I can be helpful to you in this regard. I won't dwell too much on the peril part of this. It should be kind of obvious to us with the floods and the hurricanes and the fires. But I will tell you that when you visited Paradise, California, when I did, town of 25,000, and you go for an hour at dark and there's nobody there and it looks like a post-apocalypse movie, you know we got to do something about climate change. So I hope that you all can get together to figure out some things to do. I want to point to our state's experience because I think it has been helpful. The first thing I want to say about our state's experience is we have been dedicated to developing a clean energy economy, and in part because of that, we have the best economy in the United States. We have the fastest GDP growth, the fastest job growth, and the fastest wage growth in the United States. Business Insider magazine said we're the best place to do business. Oxfam said we're the best place to work, and that's in part because of the clean energy policies that we have adopted, and we've had some considerable success. We've built a wind turbine industry from 0 to 3,000 megawatts in the last 12 years. In a clean energy fund that we've developed, we've leveraged about $200 million of private equity and now are putting people to work. We're on track of putting 50,000 electric cars on our road, including the governor's little General Motors Bolt built in Orion, Michigan, with American workers, a spiffy little safe car. Those policies are working in my state, but we are not done. We now, in my legislature, have several bills to move this clean energy revolution forward. 100% electrical bill, or excuse me, a 100% clean grid bill, which is advancing in my state. An improvement of our renewable energy portfolio. A provision to make sure that we wean ourselves off of coal-fired electricity and several other bills that I'm happy to talk about in more length. But I am not the only governor and the only state that has been moving forward. We've had significant advances across the United States. In Colorado, Jared Polis just signed an order accelerating widespread electrifications of cars and buses. In New Jersey, Delaware, and Virginia, they are considering adoption of a regional greenhouse gas initiative that has been modeled somewhat on the RGGI program. In New Mexico, just voted to double renewable energy use in the state by 2025, and have joined Hawaii and California by calling for 100% electricity to be carbon-free by 2045. Illinois has just passed the Future Energy Jobs Act, which has expanded solar energy and setting 25% renewable energy goals. And because of these actions, we are experiencing profound transformation of the economy to a clean energy economy today. Today, there are 3.2 million Americans working in the clean energy sector today, and it is the fastest growing sector of the economy. You know, the number one fastest growing job classification in the United States today is solar panel installer, and number two is wind turbine technician. And you can't go anywhere in this country and not see small businesses putting people to work developing clean energy jobs, and that is why it is so exciting. I mean, I just looked at Illinois, for example, because I wanted to honor Representative Shimkus. Has 8,633 wind jobs. It has 4,879 solar jobs. There's 7,357 electric vehicles on the road. This is a 93% increase. We are in the midst of a great transition, and I'm hopeful that we can help you in some way figure out how to accelerate that transition. Thanks very much. Look forward to your softball questions and gentle criticisms.
And whatever else might follow. Thank you, Governor, for your opening statement. We now will move to member questions. Each member will have 5 minutes to ask questions of our witness. I will start by recognizing myself for 5 minutes. Governor, again, welcome. I know many of my colleagues will have questions about how the federal government can better support your efforts, as well as the specific solutions you are pursuing in Washington. I want to take stock of where we have been. I think back to 10 years ago, the last time Congress had a meaningful debate on climate pollution and the need for and opportunities from a clean energy transition. During this time, the cost of cleaner alternatives, such as renewable energy, have dropped at previously unimaginable rates. Clean energy jobs have been created across our country, and a greater public awareness of the climate science, of the threat we face, and of the urgency at which we must respond has taken hold. So, Governor, what are the biggest developments in the climate debate or policy since you left this House?
Well, I think that the most significant thing that has happened is that our research and some of our policies are actually bearing fruit. There's a really good news story here. I just had a breakfast with a woman leader in the clean energy industry, and she was pointing out that the suite of some of the small policies we adopted during the Recovery Act, for instance, during some of our tax policies, which have been supremely successful driving economic development and driving down the cost of these systems. So the cost of solar energy in the last 10 years has come down 80%. The cost of wind turbine energy has come down about 20%. That has been the product to some degree of some of the policies that we've adopted, and I think that's really an optimistic thing to say, that when we do put our shoulder to the wheel, we can drive reductions in cost and therefore further deployment. The other thing I would say is that this is being successful not just as an urban, but it's an urban and rural, and it's a small and big state effort. I'll just give you an example. In my state, in part because of our policies, some of our greatest clean energy job creation are in rural parts of our state and smaller communities. So the largest, for instance, carbon fiber manufacturer in the Western Hemisphere that goes into electric cars is not in Seattle, it's in Moses Lake, Washington, in central Washington, a kind of a smaller town. One of the largest biofuels manufacturers is not in Seattle, it's in Grays Harbor, Washington, which is a town that has had some stress because of the diminution of the forest industry. I just went to the ribbon cutting of the largest solar farm in our state, which is near Lind, Washington, which is a town of 300. So you have these beautiful solar panels surrounded by wheat fields. This is an economic development program that is available to all Americans throughout our country. And I think that's a lesson that's important. The other thing we've learned is that you can do these things with essentially no or de minimis cost to consumers. Because as the technology has come on, we've actually got cheaper products. So if you're driving an electric car today, you have probably 80% lower fuel costs to run your car. And that's why we're happy in my state to have one of the largest percentage of use of electric cars to meet our goals. Those things are working.
So, thank you, Governor. And so, in that near decade that has passed since we last visited this issue, what important lessons are the most that speak most clearly to us about learning from our past efforts?
Well, I think the most important lesson is one that's really rarely noted, which is that the cost of inaction is enormous. I think that's an important lesson here. Somebody asked me about the cost of investment in solar energy. It's a lot cheaper than when your town burns down like Paradise, California. It's a lot cheaper than the $1.6 billion we've lost in agricultural production because of these recent floods. It's a lot cheaper than the U.S. Navy is going to have to invest because of sea level rise at our Norfolk facility. So one of the lessons is these investments pay off ultimately if we can reduce the level of damages that we are incurring. Second is that when you make relatively small investments, you can start huge industries. Just give you an example. So several years ago, we started this little clean energy development fund. It was $120 million, relatively small, but it's designed to leverage private equity, to be in partnership with private equity to help small-scale startups start up. Started a little company called Energy, which does vanadium flow battery. At that time, essentially research, and they brought in some private equity, and today that company is making the largest vanadium battery in the world, which is really important to be able to integrate renewable energy into the grid. My neighbor's kid went to work with them a couple years ago and really likes the job. Now, this is an important issue because we have a president of the United States that says, your television will blank out if the wind doesn't blow. Well, that's just not true. We have this new invention called batteries, and now we are integrating batteries into the grid. I turned on some of the first ones at Washington State University. So we know these things work. We know that these small policies can develop big, big industries. We've seen it happen. We just need to accelerate it.
Thank you very much, Governor. And the chair now recognizes Representative Shimkus, Republican leader of the subcommittee, for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Jay, welcome back. Nuclear power, where does it fit in this carbon-free society?
Well, I think that we need to continue to do R&D in any potential low-carbon or zero-carbon emission, and that includes nuclear power. I think that we need to continue research to figure out whether we can solve some of the things we need to solve for nuclear power, which obviously, and are well known to you, we need to bring down the cost. We need to have a more passive safety system. We would need to have something that solve the nuclear waste problem, either by eliminating the waste or finding something in the waste. And fourth, you would have to win public support. So those things would need to happen, and I support R&D on those. Some of that's going on in my state right now.
Let's follow on the closing the fuel cycle, and you were probably prepared. You and I obviously worked diligently on this years ago, and you co-sponsored the amendment. The act, we have nuclear waste, spent fuel, 39 states, 121 locations. We have a law that is the 82 Nuclear Waste Policy Act, along with the amendments of 87. Has your position changed on finishing the scientific study to see if it's safe to store waste at Yucca Mountain?
Well, I think that what the last few years have shown is that we need to find a more consensus-based approach on waste disposal. I do believe that.
But don't you believe that if a prior sitting federal legislator and a president signed it, that they've already done that hard work? I mean, the legislative branch already passed it, the president signed it into law. I think my concern is we're relitigating a law that's already passed, and in the past, and I'm not trying to pile on. I consider you a friend, but I just hope we would rethink this, because closing that fuel cycle is part of this solution that we would like to, because I do think nuclear power, especially major baseload power, is critical. Some of the wind production tax credits, which you talked about, has really hurt the cost-benefit analysis of nuclear power, and that's why Exelon, one of the major generators, is starting to close nuclear power plants, which is, in essence, contrary to this goal of a carbon-free generation world that people are trying to push. And I think that's something that we will talk about as we move on this committee. Let me ask another a question that deals with, I wanted to tell you, my son graduated from Western Washington University and interned in Olympia, so I'm not sure what's happening with my family.
Well, he's going to be a Democrat. I know that if he went to Western, that's for sure.
So and I want to thank Kathy for getting him there. So for the sake, this committee will deal with the spent fuel debate. We passed a bipartisan bill off the floor last Congress, 340 to 70, I think, bipartisan, and more Democrats voted for it than against it. Can you, for the sake of this committee, just briefly talk about the problems you have at Hanford as far as the defense toxic sludge that we have in those, I don't know how many containers and buried underneath ground, and you can weave the story a lot better than I can.
Well, one of the problems we have is that the administration at the moment is not, at least in our view, complying with some of the needs.
No, and I get that, and we can go through administrations, just weave the story about what the challenges are there. I mean, we could look at Obama, we can look at Bush, we can look at negligence across the spectrum. But what do we have? I mean, there are how many tanks there at Hanford?
So we have millions of gallons of sludge, as you're well worth knowledgeable about. We are having technological challenges, and we want to get the vitrification plant up and running. It would be help if the administration, rather than looking this as kind of a financial sacrifice zone, will actually help make this happen.
And explain for my colleagues who may have not been there, what is this sludge? What are we talking about?
Well, we're talking about leftover waste from the nuclear facility that won the Cold War, and we expect any administration, whether it's Republican or Democrat, to help us in the cleanup effort. And if you allow me to finish,
And are we not close to the Columbia River?
would you like to testify, John? And I'll just
No, actually, the defense waste and the spent fuel is one package, and it's just it's when we have to deal with this, it's not just spent fuel from nuclear power plants. This is a solution to our defense portfolio, and that's the only reason why I bring it up.
That's correct.
I'm not trying to do the gotcha.
I do want to make the point, though, that the administration is not fulfilling its obligation to the people of the state of Washington in a variety of contexts. We've had some safety concerns that for workers, particularly, that we've been concerned about, and we will continue to be diligent to hold this administration's feet to the fire, and I hope this committee does the same, whether it's Republican and Democrat. And right now, the administration is not doing its job to get this job done, and I think it owes it to the whole country and to the state of Washington.
We should move the waste. That would be helpful.
Gentleman yields back. The chair now recognizes Mr. Peters for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you, Governor, for being here. I'm excited about having you here. In your testimony, you talk a little bit about the accomplishments of the federal government recently. You're not complimentary. You mentioned that the administration has rolled back the Clean Power Plan that has poised to transition our grids into the 21st century, attacked fuel economy and clean car standards that have saved lives and lowered consumer costs, gutting modest standards that would have lowered methane leaks in the oil and gas industry. I don't think that gets enough attention, and increasing illegal rules to bring back inefficient equipment and appliances that cost consumers money. You might have also mentioned that we withdrew from the Paris Agreement and a number of other things that have gone in the wrong direction. Assuming we could get back to zero and deal with all those things, what would be your priorities for federal action if we got back in the game in a significant way?
Well, let me just follow up on what you said. It's important to get back to, quote, zero, because zero, we were making progress. These things you rattle off are extremely important, extremely effective. And they're not small things. And I believe they can be done through executive action of whoever is in the office in the future, and should be. And I think they flow, the current president's policies on this have flowed from a really dangerous pessimism about our ability to build a clean energy economy. I think there's too much fear about this, and I think if we look at the success we've had, we've seen that these things actually work. When I heard the president the other day saying that, you know, your television will turn off if the wind doesn't blow, I don't know why someone has not explained to him the existence of batteries. I don't, you know, batteries run tweets, so I don't know why you couldn't understand batteries can run your grid. And in fact, we're making huge progress in the ability to do that. And not just electric batteries. We have pump storage there's a pump storage program that can put hundreds and thousands of people to work in central Washington. So I think we have to have a little more optimism, and if we do follow the can-do spirit of America, we will embrace these executive actions. But going forward, I would suggest that the things that the states are doing very successfully are things that are template for success federally. That includes a 100% electrical grid goal for our electrical grid. It includes a clean fuel standard for our transportation fuels. It includes a very, very significant expansion of our federal research and development and a whole slew of technologies. Right. When I was sitting where you were, I noted that we spent more money developing one kind of Jeep than we did in the entire clean energy research budget of the United States. And when you have an existential threat, which is of the equivalent of a world war in some sense, you ought to have an R&D budget that in fact does that. We have shown that increased our building codes to be consistent with the existing building technology can be very effective, and we're hopefully going to pass a bill at my legislature this year that will upgrade our building codes so we don't waste energy at all. Investments in infrastructure are extremely important. We've had $70 billion of transportation infrastructure in my state that are putting thousands of people to work. 70% of that is in public transportation, which is low-carbon systems. So building an infrastructure program, which I would hope Congress would do soon, and making sure a significant part of it goes to reduce our carbon footprint in transportation is extremely important. Assistance to consumers and small businesses for some of the capital needs to get these technologies in our hands is very, very useful. What we know is that most of these technologies, if you do an investment of $10, you save $80 on your costs over the lifetime of your program. Don't hold me to those numbers. This is just a hypothetical for the moment. But the point is, once you can get a little capital that allows the initial investment, you save money over the lifetime of your investment. All of these things, as a suite of policies, in some part are being placed in states around the country. The RGGI program has been very successful.
I'd say the particular thing you raised, which is not being done and probably can't be done by states, is the research part of it. And I would say,
yeah, I think that's where maybe the federal government could be most important, right. Having the financial resources that the federal government does, and having a unified R&D program nationally, I think would be extremely important.
Do you believe it's important for the federal government to be involved in making sure that the grid is interoperable state to state? Is that important?
Yes, it's extremely important. And we also want to develop policies so that we can move renewable energy to its most productive usage. And the federal government can be helpful in that interplay with different grid systems. And I would love to talk to you about that.
Love to. My time has expired. Thank you, Governor.
The gentleman yields back. The chair now recognizes the gentlelady from the state of Washington, Representative Rogers, for 5 minutes.
Thank you. Governor Inslee, welcome back to the House Energy and Commerce Committee. Out of curiosity, I just wanted to start out by asking you how you traveled here and what the carbon footprint was associated with that travel, and if you had laid out specific steps to offset that impact.
Yes, I intend to develop a clean energy system for the United States and the state of Washington, and that will be the most tremendous offset of anything I've ever done in my entire life, because we will give my grandchildren an opportunity to have a life that's not severely degraded. And I travel here the same way that everybody on this committee traveled here, which is on a jet airplane, and we are now developing biofuels, and we have developed biofuels in my state, something we should be proud of at Washington State University and Alaska Airlines. Yes. That have developed a biofuel that we can fly. We've flown a Boeing airplane across the Atlantic Ocean.
Yes, Thank you, and I'm excited about the biofuels too, because it helps us address what's going on our forest. Governor Inslee, as you know, in Washington State, our largest source of clean, renewable, reliable, affordable energy is hydropower, 70%. The Columbia and Snake River system provide important energy for us. They also provide irrigation to water our crops, making agriculture our #1 industry. Flood control, preventing catastrophic floods that we had in years past. Barging a product up and down the river. It's really a super highway with significantly less carbon impact than trucks or trains. So I just had some yes or no questions I wanted to ask you. Do you support removal of the dams?
I support what we're doing in our state, which we have a task force to help respond to the federal court order to evaluate the potential of that, both from the positive and negative consequences, and there are both positive and negative consequences. And I support a way for Washington citizens to have their voices heard so that they can look at the cost to agriculture of difficulty moving wheat, for instance. They can look for the costs of transportation, but they can also look at the potential positives from the salmon recovery standpoint. And as you know, we're in a federal court order to determine all of these things. So I support Washington State citizens being able to have a system, which we've developed, as you know, on our task force, to be able to address that issue. And I'll be working with citizens to evaluate all of those things.
Okay, I have some other questions. Do you acknowledge that fish rates are maintaining even levels or even increasing, as was outlined in your own State of the Salmon report?
I'm sorry, did you say fish rates?
Yes, fish return rates up and down the river.
No, I am not confident that over a long term that we have stability on the Columbia system. And the reason I say that is that the system is dependent on things in the salmon life cycle that are not on the system itself. They depend, for instance, on food chains out in the Pacific Ocean. And unfortunately, we are seeing some degradation of those food chains because of climate change, because of increasing temperatures, both in the mainstream and in the ocean, and in acidification of the ocean.
Yes or no?
So the answer is no.
Okay, thanks. I have another one. Do you agree if the dams are removed, Washington's agriculture industry will be negatively impacted?
It would be if we did not find some other alternative for transportation. And that's one of the things that this group is going to be evaluating, is to determine whether there are feasible alternatives for transportation. And that's something that I think that deserves a great scrutiny, where everyone's voice is heard to look at those potential alternatives. And there may be potential alternatives in rail and trucking and the like. And I think that that is appropriately investigated in a real sense, where we can really get down to it. And here's the reason I say that. I think it's important for people to have a forum to look at this on a scientifically credible way, rather than just press releases or bumper stickers. We need people listening to one another, and I hope that that'll happen.
Okay. I think I'll just go to my last question, which is about your recent travel expenses and increased security, detail, expenses to run for president. Do you plan to reimburse the taxpayers of Washington State for these expenses that you're incurring on non-official business, and do you plan to offset the carbon emissions associated with that non-official travel?
So we plan to follow the law and plan to follow the current law, and that's what we'll be doing.
Thank you. I yield back.
Gentlelady yields back. The chair now recognizes the representative from the state of Delaware, Representative Lisa Blunt Rochester, for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and welcome back, Governor. I'm pleased to be joining this important hearing on state and local action on climate change. While the federal government has chosen to take a back seat on climate change, my state of Delaware doesn't have that luxury. My state has the lowest mean elevation of any state in the nation, and my constituents don't need any convincing that this climate crisis is real. It has touched every corner of Delaware, with chronic flooding threatening homes in our cities, harsher and harsher storms eroding our beautiful beaches and threatening our natural heritage, and changing growing seasons threatening the way of life of our farmers. Governor, I was pleased to see that my state made it into your prepared testimony for our low-carbon transportation initiative. While our state has made great strides in combating climate change, As the challenges we face continue to grow in scope and severity, we know that the solutions must grow in equal measure. As governor of a coastal state, can you talk to us about the unique challenges that climate change poses on coastal communities and what solutions that you found to be most impactful during your time as governor?
Unfortunately, everyone with a coastline has this issue. It's a unifying issue, Republicans and Democrats. If you've got a coastline, you're a potential victim. And by the way, I want to mention who the first victims of climate change are. It's most frequently marginalized communities. It's the frontline communities, frequently communities of color. It is people living in poverty who are living next to the freeways, breathing those diesel smoke, living next to polluting industries. And part of our just transition we have to make during this transition to a cleaner energy source, I think has to take that into account. We need a just transition to a clean energy system, not just a transition. So as far as this is a unifying thing, and I took as you know, I co-authored a little book here years ago about this, and I was looking at it the other night and had a picture of the first house in America that was maybe lost. It was in Shishmaref, Alaska, of a house that's fallen into the sea because the tundra was collapsing. That was a window into the future, but it's not too far off. I was in Miami Beach a few months ago with the mayor, where they've had to build up their roads 1.5 feet. Now when you go shopping in Miami Beach, you walk down to the shops. It's kind of an unusual circumstance. The U.S. Navy is very concerned at Norfolk about damage and threats of sea level rise to a very important naval base. We had Admiral Fallon in Seattle talking about the national security risks of rising sea levels. And we've actually even I just read an island in Hawaii's small little uninhabited island has gone under. So it doesn't take rocket science to understand this, and it's something that unifies us all.
You know, Delaware, we're small, as everyone knows, so we have an average annual budget of somewhere around $4 billion. And when we talk about these issues, you even mentioned those environmental justice communities. These are like major infrastructure investments that will need to be made. Could you talk about any low-cost, high-impact projects that you've seen during your tenure?
Well, there's a whole slew of them, but I'll give you an example. When you talk about a just transition issue, we are closing our last remaining coal-fired plant in Centralia, Washington. And that happened because of a community consensus, and we embedded into that program about $65 million for what you might call a just transition, to help workers with training costs, to help small businesses to develop in their local communities, to help develop different utility systems to help people through that transition. And that was embedded in the program, and it was done through a consensus. And it was important because it recognized that there are transition costs and difficulties when you do go through a transition. In our bills this year in our state legislature, we have provisions in our 100% clean electrical grid bill that will assure that utilities cushion any impacts with low-income people through their utility bills in a variety of different measures. So these things are working. I know they're working in other states. And the interesting thing, too, I'll just get one more other point. The 23 states that are now part of the U.S. Climate Alliance, which has been very successful because no one else has followed Donald Trump off the cliff on this, they're the ones with the best economic performance. So these things lead to economic performance. They don't degrade it.
Governor, I have 3 seconds left, and I just want to thank you so much for raising the visibility of this nationally, because it is an issue of our time. Thank you, and I yield back.
Gentlelady yields back. The chair now recognizes the gentleman from the state of West Virginia, Representative McKinley, for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and welcome back, Governor. I remember when you were here on the committee and we had some exchanges. Let me just curious, I read your testimony, and on about third or fourth sentence from the end of it, or paragraph, you made an interesting remark. You said, states cannot solve this problem of magnitude of this on their own. And I can't agree with you more. We're going to need that, not only all the states working together, but we got to have a global approach towards this problem because states in and of itself can't. But I would submit to you that I think states can cause part of the problem as well. You had a report put out, it was a 122-page greenhouse gas emissions technical report that said that you all funded in the state of Washington, that exporting U.S. coal would have the benefit of reducing total global greenhouse gases. Now, let's look at it again. Would have the benefit of reducing greenhouse gas emissions by exporting. Now, having said that, your administration, you've been fighting exporting coal. I find a disconnect there. Your own report says that would help on greenhouse gases, but yet, with all due respect, you put up roadblocks to prevent exporting of coal through Washington. Can you explain how you think that does not negatively impact the environment by preventing American coal from being burned overseas rather than low quality Indonesia or Australian or other coal? Can you give me something briefly on that?
I think you're referring to a failure of an applicant for a particular project to obtain the legally required permits by the Washington State Department of Ecology.
If that's the case, can you work with them rather than deny it? Can you work with them so that they can? Would you support exporting coal in compliance with your report that said that would reduce greenhouse gases around the world? Would you support that?
Yeah, I want to make sure that in answering your question, I'm answering it not in respect to that particular applicant. So I'm going to give you an answer to your question, but it does not have anything to do with that previous site that I just referred to, because that was a decision by the State Department of Ecology. But in general, here's my thinking about coal, and we have to realize, I think, a fundamental scientific fact. And it is difficult to recognize.
All due respect,
You asked
I
me a
heard
question.
your testimony when you were here in committee. I know where your position is anti-coal, and I respect that, where you're coming from.
Not enough to let me answer the question, apparently.
No, I don't need for you to go on a diatribe about the coal. My question is, if it's a global effort that we need to do, and America is already reducing its CO2 emissions, which are important for us to do it, but the rest of the world is not engaging. I want, for the record, everyone to understand that we may very well be able to decarbonize, perhaps in America, and upset our economy. But if the rest of the world doesn't do something about its emissions, particularly in China and India, we're still going to have droughts, wildfires, severe weather alerts. We're still going to have coastal problems with water increasing, the oceans increasing with it. My concern is, why aren't we working on a global stand rather than individually trying to put up roadblocks as you are in the state of Washington? The Paris Accord did not have the teeth, and you and I both know that. It did not have the teeth. The nations were not complying with the Paris Accord. Therefore, that's one of the reasons I led the letter to encourage the president to withdraw until we can put some teeth into that Paris Accord that makes people comply with that standard and lower the standard. But what you've done is actually put impediments in Washington to prevent that from happening.
So if you'll allow me to answer, I'll try to answer those three questions. Number one, we should work with other countries, just like our states are working with one another. Our states are a template for success. We now have 23 states that are committed to moving forward, and all of those states in their own individual way are making progress. We ought to have the same degree of cooperative spirit with other nations. But that has not happened because the President of the United States decided to try to withdraw us from the Paris Agreement. As you know, he can't legally until the next year. And it is hardly helpful when the vast majority of humanity has recognized this existential threat to their life on this planet, and then have the leader of the free world tear it up and walk away in a petulant juvenile fit. That is not helpful in developing international cooperation. That's number one. Let me finish, because you asked me three questions. Number two, coal is just a scientific fact that is very difficult that we have to realize. And that if we burn all of the coal that we have, we will not have anything that looks like the way we live today. Now, that's just a scientific fact. So to some degree, we have to manage a transition to a cleaner energy economy over the next several decades. And I think we all ought to work together to figure out how to do that, to manage that transition, to help the communities that are part of that transition. And I made reference to the Centralia plant is a way that we have done that. And three, we ought to be all working together to develop alternatives to coal, which we're doing, and these 23 states are showing success. So I approach this with optimism and confidence because we're the most can-do people in the history of the planet, and I believe we can get that job done.
Thank you. I guess I've run out of time. I guess concluding, you said you would not put a roadblock up to exporting coal out of Washington if they filled the application outright. Is that what I'm hearing you say?
I'm saying that we follow the law in the state of Washington, and the law in the state of Washington, as developed through the permitting process, that one of these particular plants, according to the Washington State Department of Ecology, did not satisfy the laws of the state of Washington. That's what I'm saying.
The gentleman yields back. The chair now recognizes Mr. Pallone, full committee chair, for 5 minutes to ask questions.
Thank you, Chairman Tonko, and again, welcome back, Governor Inslee. At our last subcommittee hearing, we had a productive discussion about subnational actors like cities, states, and companies stepping up to the plate after President Trump rashly announced the U.S. would abandon the Paris Agreement. And you've been very active in that regard, not only in your role as governor, but also as co-founder of the U.S. Climate Alliance, which has been very successful over the last few years in expanding bipartisan membership and forging a path to effectively address climate change. But in your testimony, you say, and I quote, "The truth remains that without leadership from our federal government, the country won't be able to do enough fast enough," unquote. So I just wanted you to expand on that point. Why is the federal leadership still needed? And are there tools available to the federal government that states don't have at their disposal?
Well, the first reason is that today we have 23 states, and by the way, those include 3 governors who have joined this, 3 Republican governors who are part of that alliance. And that represents the majority of the American people, I believe, and about 60% of the U.S. economy. And I believe if it was a separate nation, it would be the 3rd largest economy in the world, these 23 states. So this is what you might call a big deal. But it's not all the United States, and it's important that we all work together, and it's important that industries have consistency as much as we can for policies. We'd all like to have the most consistent policies that we can for investment policy decisions. So having consistency would be useful in addition to having the entire United States economy associated with that. In addition, the federal government just has some resources that the states do not have, particularly in the research and development, which is extremely important. We've seen what R&D can do when we defeated fascism federally. We see what R&D can do when we went to the moon nationally, and we ought to be able to achieve the same levels of federal R&D to really make this happen. Now, it also is an issue of, for instance, transportation infrastructure. The federal government can be a driving force in that regard that can really, really help in infrastructure. The federal government can help in the procurement policy so that when we buy products, we can help drive a clean, green procurement system. That can be very useful. Secretary Mabus of the Navy started that, and it really helped when he had the Green Fleets program to drive the development of biofuels and the like. So there are so many multiple tools that the federal government has that could assist the states in moving forward. I mean, we're making big progress when you see what's happening, but we need a federal partner, and I hope people will work together to get that done.
Well, I appreciate that, and let me get to the last point you made. While not a substitute for federal leadership, I do believe that renewed congressional action on climate change is a step in the right direction, and I'm interested in moving legislation to support state and local government efforts to respond and prepare for the effects of climate change. The mayors on the second panel are going to suggest, among other things, that Congress should reauthorize the Energy Efficiency Community Block Grant. So what policies or initiatives should Congress consider enacting to support and further expand what your state and other states and local climate on the front of climate action? And what policies or initiatives should Congress prioritize in that regard to help the states and the towns?
The first priority would be to remove the shackles that prevent us from moving forward in states. And there are some that prevent us, for instance, in transportation fuels, federal policies have prevented us from moving forward with some of our CAFE standards and the like. So the first order of business was take off the weights that we carry of the federal restrictions, particularly the ones that have come from this administration. A second, and this is, look, I just think the best thing the federal government can do is to adopt federally what our states are doing from a state perspective. And it doesn't really require to mandate or even assist states. It's just to get the federal government in the same business with the same templates of success. And I believe the states are a template of success. Look, you know, I'm criticized, my party is criticized frequently of saying that our policies will somehow be destructive of economic growth. I hear the president saying we won't have planes or trains or cars, and that's just not the case. When we're driving electric cars, the governor has a little electric car that works. We've been accused of doing things that will retard economic progress, but the facts just don't bear that out. Look, my state is the most rapidly growing economy in the country, and when you look at the 23 states that are doing things on clean energy, by and large, they're the ones that have the greatest rate of economic growth. So I just suggest the most important thing to do is for the federal government to be as confident and optimistic as the states are right now in our capability to build a clean energy economy. If we infect the U.S. Congress with the confidence we have in Massachusetts with a Republican governor, and Maryland with a Republican governor, and Vermont with a Republican governor, good things are going to happen. And that's why I'm here today, and I wish some of my colleagues were here. I understand others were invited, but I'm the one who had the most friends here, so I came.
Well, thank you, Governor. Thank you for what your state is doing and for the U.S. climate action work. We appreciate it.
Thank you.
The gentleman yields back. The chair now recognizes the gentleman from the state of Georgia, Representative Carter, for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Governor, thank you for being here. This is an extremely important subject, and we appreciate your participation. Climate change is real. Climate's been changing since day one. Protecting our environment is real. We all recognize that. I noticed in your in your 7 pages of testimony that you mention a number of renewable energies such as wind, solar, and hydro, but you didn't mention nuclear. I'm just wondering, it would appear to me that we're going to have to use a number of different resources in order to get to the common goal that we want to get to, and certainly carbon capture and nuclear power are going to be a part of that. I'm just wondering, why did you omit nuclear power in your testimony?
I didn't know because I didn't write it, so we'll have to ask my staff the answer to that question.
Okay, fair enough.
But I've been very forthright in saying that we need to have under consideration any low carbon or zero carbon technology, and I think we have to be non-ecumenical about this, and I have been in my policies. I'll give you an example. In my state, Representative Rogers brought up hydroelectric. We now are classifying hydroelectric in our clean energy 100% grid, which has been a concern of some folks. I have been supportive of research and development in the nuclear industry. There are some modular nuclear systems that might be productive if, now this is a big if, we got to make sure we understand this. We need to make sure that they are cost effective, and they are not to date. As you know, the cost is what has been the biggest problem in the nuclear industry, that they're safer, that they have a waste disposal problem, and they have public acceptance. So my view is it makes sense to find out if any of those things can be solved. They would have to be solved before nuclear would become a meaningful component of an energy future going forward. But I think it makes sense to look to find out if they can be. I've had a couple questions from this side of the panel about nuclear. The one comment I would make is I think it's really important for all of us to be non-selective amongst multiple low and zero carbon solutions here. I think that's important because some of them are going to pan out and some of them aren't. And I'm for having a broadest view of all possible measures.
Okay, to follow up on that comment, let me ask you this then. Do you think it's the state's role to mandate to power companies how they're going to lower their emissions, or would you agree that it would really be advantageous to allow the power companies to come up with their own plans, because what may work in Washington State may not necessarily work in the state of Georgia. I can tell you that in Georgia, Southern Company has done a good job of decreasing their emissions and has made a lot of progress, and yet the state hasn't mandated to them what types of decreases they should make.
You know, that's an interesting question, and I'll give you two contradictory answers. One of this is, yes, we're always looking for the most cost-effective, clean energy source to get the job done from a cost-effectiveness standpoint. But there is an argument for policies that will help specific industries move forward, and I'll tell you why. For instance, in a renewable portfolio standard, if you just have a standard for multiple technologies, the only one that gets developed is the next most cost-effective one, even though you know you've got plans B, C, and D that you're going to have to develop to get the job done. So I think there are some circumstances where policies that are specific to particular technologies make sense, because if you know you're going to have 4 different tools, you need to find a way to make sure all of those tools are developed.
Right. We may have some minor differences on that, but nevertheless, I do want to get to this before my time runs out, and that is, obviously, Washington State is a big forestry state. Georgia is the #1 forestry state in the nation, by the way. And I noticed, again, you didn't mention biomass, and I'm just wondering if you might speak to that, because biomass is certainly something that is American-made, if you will. It's something that we can actually do here.
Yes, I think that sequestration of carbon in biological systems is something we should explore, and we ought to see if there's a way even to create a revenue stream for people in the timber industry and the agriculture industry to sequester carbon in topsoil. And the reason that makes sense is not only can it help sequestration of carbon in topsoil, but it also, when you do those things, you prevent erosion in a lot of the low and no-till technologies. These things make sense. The same thing to be said in the timber industry. The difficulty we've had is that some of the folks who are interested in these industries have been the most resistant to actually doing things that would allow us to create that kind of program. So it will be helpful when folks, and we have some leaders in our timber industry who are interested in developing technology or policies to actually allow that to happen. It'll help when we have more folks in the ag industries want to develop policies to create a revenue stream possibly for sequestration of carbon in topsoil. I really look forward to that day, and I look forward to the day when this is a more bipartisan effort.
Well, and I recognize my time has expired, and let me say that I think this is going to be a tremendous opportunity for us. Working together and as innovative as we are in America, I look forward to this, because I think there is just so much innovation out there that can be accomplished, and I look forward to working toward it.
Yeah, if the chair will allow me to just comment on this. I think this is an important point. I agree with you with this caveat, and I'll just tell you about a conversation I had with the second President Bush. It was the first time I talked to him, and we were talking about the potential of sequestering carbon from coal plants. And he said he was very excited about clean coal technology, of maybe being able to sequester and put coal in the ground. And but what I pointed out to him is that would involve additional cost, and no one's going to do it unless there's some system to create a reason to do it, and an ambition to do it, and an incentive to do it. And so the only reason to actually do it, even if the technology worked, is if you had some limitation on pollution or some other market mechanism to drive incentives. And it is the same for sequestration in topsoil or in the timber. So we have to have some mechanism to create an incentive not to put carbon in the atmosphere in the first place for any of these programs to work. And that's where we need some more bipartisan help in this regard.
The gentleman yields back. The chair now recognizes the gentleman from the state of Florida, Representative Soto, for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and Governor Inslee, welcome back. Obviously, you're getting varied welcomes here, but I hope that you're enjoying your time here. As you may know, 8 of the last 10 years have been the hottest years on record, and we've had 1.4 percent increase in temperature Fahrenheit-wise since the 1880s. We're scheduled, if nothing is done, for that to go even higher. 3 inches in sea rise since 1993. And the idea of global warming, though, I think can be misleading in that it's not just that the world is getting warmer, but we can see more extreme weather, whether it's hotter summers or colder winters. In my own home state of Florida, we have to deal with sea barriers and new water treatment plants and sewer systems, and we're very vulnerable to that. But Washington also faces kind of a double threat, isn't that correct? Like both colder winters and coastal threats from rising seas. I think Mount Rainier even got snowed in for a while this year, if I remember correctly, because the jet stream is no longer maintaining a lot of that Arctic air just in the north. So what are some of the effects you're seeing as far as increasing cold temperatures and then what your state's doing to combat these coastal threats?
Well, I think what you point out is something, this originally was called global warming, and it's turned out to be global weirding because it is disrupting all kinds of patterns. And it's so strange because you get it on both ends. You get drought. Or may declare a drought emergency and increasing droughts in one season, whereas you have increasing precipitation flooding events in a different season. So we've had fires in the summer. Last year, one day in Seattle was the worst air quality in the world because of the particulates from the fires that were raging. And our fires in the Cascade Mountains and in British Columbia were on fire, and we had, weeks of smoke. We had to close some of our swimming pools in the state of Washington because of air quality hazards to our kids. You have infectious disease problems where insects are moving forward. We're now getting tick infestations, which are spreading diseases moving forward fairly rapidly. Our sea level rise is now affecting some of our coastal communities. We're actually having to move some of the infrastructure in that regard. And here's one that I don't think gets enough discussion here, and that's the acidification of the water in my state. So the pH level is dropping rapidly. It's about 30% more acidic than it was before we started to burn fossil fuels. That has prevented us from growing baby oysters because they can't precipitate calcium carbonate out of the water. We now have to grow the baby oysters in tanks where you put like soda to increase the pH. So this is having so many untoward effects. It's not from one direction, it's from many directions, and it's from Governor. Look, this is a firsthand deal with me. When you go into Wenatchee, Washington, and you see a couple crying in front of their house that was torched, and a man holding his wife, and she's like collapsing. Climate change is not an abstraction to governors. We see it when we go to these emergencies. And so you're correct, there's a lot of reasons to do this work, but I always end on a positive note, which is with the angst I feel about these multiple emergencies I'm having to declare. I have the opposite spectrum when I see my friends' kids going to work in clean energy.
And I wanted to talk a little bit about that. You all have been a tech leader in so many ways in Washington, but $6 billion in renewable investment, a $125 million clean energy fund you mentioned. How has renewable energy, the new renewable energy economy, changed your GDP? And can you talk a little bit about that technology boon that you all have?
I will try to get you a number. I actually don't have a number on GDP, but all I can tell you, it's significant because every county I go to has some sort of sense, because we have been very broad-minded in our policies. A gentleman from Georgia asked a question about sequestration. So biomass, by law, is carbon neutral in our statute. We've actually declared biomass to be carbon neutral so that we can get an advantage to help the ag industry and the timber industry using biomass. And right now we're developing a cross-laminated timber industry that can be of assistance to the timber industry using some of that waste product coming out of the timber, potentially as a fuel source as well. So the fact that we've been eclectic and non-judgmental, looking at all spectrum of jobs, has been very effective for us, and I hope the federal policy will follow.
The gentleman yields back. The chair now recognizes the gentleman, excuse me, from South Carolina, Representative Duncan, for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I yield the gentleman from Illinois as much time as he may need.
I thank my colleague and Governor again, welcome, and I do relish our friendship and the work we've done together and the battles we've had. I just wanted to make sure I had time to, because of other aspirations that you have, just put some facts on the table. President Bush got more votes in Nevada in 2004 than in 2000 after he approved the site selection. President Obama got fewer votes in Nevada in 2012 than in 2008 after he helped delay the licensing project. 9 of the 16 counties, I go to Nevada quite a bit, 9 of the 16 counties have passed resolutions in support of at least adjudicating the scientific study. As you know, the Nuclear Regulatory Commission was tasked under law to evaluate the site, and after litigation, they were finally allowed to release the report which said, if used as designed, Yucca Mountain would be safe for 1 million years. So where we're at in the process now is just providing the money to allow the state of Nevada to contest that science. And that's what's been blocked through the last 2 years of the Obama administration, and then we've even faltered because of politics. You know, last cycle was Dean Heller, and now it's we don't know. Point being is that this appropriation debate is just to debate the science, which, you know, this whole thing, and you stand firm on, you know, let's look at the science. So I would just hope, if things go well for you in the future, that we would have the same standard of evaluating and using science to determine the safety, so we can at least address this defense issue and this spent fuel issue. And you know, it's something I've been working on for many times. Let me go to, and that's, I just wanted to throw that out there. Let me mention some of the issues about, and we're going to have a panel of mayors in the next panel, and some are going to be all on board, and we've got 2 that will probably be skeptical of your testimony. But let me give you, I got a letter from Mayor William Westcott of the city of Rock Falls, Illinois. The city owns and operates its own electric utility, and it participates in the Illinois Municipal Electric Agency, a collection of nonprofit public power municipalities within the state. Mayor Westcott outlines the clean energy investments his city has made, but he also talks about the critical investments in base load power in the state-of-the-art coal-fired generation facilities, a 1.6 gigawatt Prairie State Energy campus. And this is where this is his warning to policymakers. He warns that if federal and state policies that force premature closure of the coal-fired units, his city would still have to purchase energy, but then he would also be burdened to make payments on the closed facility. So it's like a double whammy for a local municipality and a government agency to say, we're going to address our electricity generation needs by the elected people that they're designed to represent. Should policies be designed to ensure cities and ratepayers are not burdened with the stranded cost, and what would be a solution?
Well, it's a broad question, but I think the solutions to these matters are, again, doing the kind of thing that we did in Centralia, which is to come up with a consensus-based approach to have a transition period that everyone can live with. And I think that process could be a template for other communities to be successful. And we have been successful in that regard. The policies that we have adopted in Washington State, I really don't think there's an argument has had any meaningful disruption to any communities or any utility or any ratepayer. We passed a renewable portfolio standard provision maybe a decade plus ago. We had 0 wind turbines or any significant wind turbines. We now have 6.
But you have all that hydroelectric that was credited as renewable, correct?
Well, actually, it wasn't. So the hydro at that time was not, quote, credited as renewable because
is it now?
It's going to be under the new 100% system. My point is that during that debate, and I was active in it, it was an initiative to the people, and there was a lot of concern expressed by utilities and some industrial customers that this is just going to drive rates to the roof, and this was technologically not possible. We now have 3,000 megawatts. They're growing rapidly. We have $6 billion of investment. The proof has been that we are much more adept at creating substitutes for some of the fossil fuel industry than we have thought. Now, I'll mention one other thing, too, and I think this is important. When we listen to people about these issues, I think it's really important to listen to some of the new players in clean energy rather than the incumbent utilities that are huge and have representatives here. And those new players are pretty inspiring. A&D Electrical Supply in Greenville in Illinois, Cooper Eaton in Troy, who are installing solar, Lakeland College in Mattoon, Paradise Energy Solutions in Sullivan. These are small companies to start with. They don't have a lot of representatives here, but I think their voice is worth listening to because
They have one.
fast. Huh?
They have one representative here.
All right.
That's me.
Good. All right. I'll agree with that.
The gentleman yields back. The chair now recognizes the gentleman from California, Representative McNerney, for 5 minutes.
Thank the chair. Welcome back, Governor. I hope you've noticed that there's been a change in the committee since you left, and that there's a general consensus that CO2 emissions are a problem. Like you, Governor, I'm bullish about the economic opportunity that comes with the transition to clean energy. I worked in the wind industry for 20 plus years. I saw the job creation, but I also saw American developed technology and jobs go overseas because of inconsistent federal policies. Could you comment on the importance of consistent and predictable federal policies?
Yeah, I think there are some importance. One of the things that perhaps be most useful is allow integration of our grid system, also responding to our cybersecurity concerns about the grid, which we know we're all attentive to, but finding ways to make the grid more effective, to allow renewable energy to be wheeled, if you will, and moved most efficiently and effectively. That could be of assistance. Second, the thing I mentioned before, to remove the restrictions on states that are now preventing us from moving forward on transportation fuels improvements. We're in the gate, ready to go if the federal government will just remove those requirements.
Well, what I'm talking about is consistency. I mean, American developed technology went overseas because American subsidies ended, and it looked more appealing to Germans and Spanish, and so that's where the technology went.
It is a heartbreak to see some technologies that in the lab were created in our labs be deployed in China and Germany because they have had policies to make them economically competitive in their grid and transportation systems. And I just don't like to see our technology developed in our universities that then other people get jobs for. And that's happened big time because we have withdrawn support significantly, and is happening because this administration has really been an ostrich with its head in the sand and its tail feathers in the air on this issue. Because they are withdrawing policies today that will help development of clean energy and utilities, because they're withdrawing policies today in transportation, some of those jobs are going overseas. We want our kids having those jobs, and I hope that we resolve this issue.
Thanks. Unfortunately, I'm not bullish about our ability to prevent the growing impacts of climate change. I personally believe we're going to blow past a 2-degree increase in global temperatures no matter what we do in this country to reduce emissions. What should we do to enhance cooperation with countries overseas so that it's not just us reducing emissions?
Well, the first thing is get it back in the Paris Agreement, which is the first commitment. And I think that's important. Look, we're the leader of the world. We're an indispensable nation because of the power of our economy. And we need them to keep, it's kind of interesting to me. I hear a lot of people who are critical of saying we shouldn't do something until the last person on earth does something. And then they turn around and say we shouldn't be in the Paris Agreement. It's not very inspiring to the rest of the world to encourage them to do things if we tear up an international agreement that we're a part of. If you want folks to do work in the rest of the world, the last thing we should be doing is abandoning an agreement that we've had with the rest of the world. You can't say you want the rest of the world to act and then turn around and say you're not part of the Paris Agreement. That's not going to inspire representatives in India or China or Germany are sitting in the seats that you guys are sitting in to take action. We want to inspire those people to take action. In some sense, we want to demand those people to take action. So yes, we should become part of the international community. The country that did the Marshall Plan and went to the moon, I think, ought to take that position.
Governor, clearly we need to reduce CO2 emissions, but I'd like to ask your opinion on the climate intervention. Specifically, do you support research on climate intervention, including sunlight reflection aerosols?
Well, I am one that believes that the use of aerosols, the use of solar screens, if it's in the lab, it shouldn't go beyond the lab until we have about 100 years more understanding of how systems work. I'm very, very anxious to think that we could intrude in these basic systems without understanding what we're doing. The consequences are things we have no idea about. And I would suggest that while our house is on fire, it's more important to grab buckets right now and put the water out than design something that, would prevent a match from being allowed in town. So I really believe that we got to focus on preventing carbon emissions in the first place. That's the battle we're in right now, and I encourage us to stay in it.
So what do you think the biggest single threat from climate change is?
Well, he's the man whose name I will not utter here.
No, well, the physical threat.
He is a physical threat, actually, but...
You think it's a disease or ocean acidification or West Antarctic ice sheet? What do you think is the worst, the biggest threat?
I could not choose the disaster scenarios amongst them because it's difficult for me to know what tragedy has been worse since I've been governor. The forest fires are the ones where I've comforted families that have lost people in forest fires. But we have had other measures as well that may be just as bad. I remember talking to a 14-year-old young woman and lived next to a freeway in Seattle. She told me that she was 11 years old before she knew someone that didn't have asthma. She thought everybody had asthma because they're all breathing that diesel smoke and toxic fumes. And it was interesting that she went out and did her own sort of research, and she found out every quarter mile you live closer to a freeway, your asthma rates go up significantly. And when I tested that with the epidemiologists at the University of Washington, her research was exactly the same as theirs. The thought that our kids are having trouble breathing might be the biggest one. And this is something that young people understand, and it's really close to their hearts. I was at Dartmouth a couple months ago and talked to a young woman who said that she had been involved in 2 conversations that week with young women who were asking themselves whether it was right to bring a child into the world that could potentially be so degraded. Now, the fact that that has reached that level of personal decision-making would suggest that we need the Congress to move.
Thank you.
The gentleman yields back. The chair recognizes the gentleman from Missouri, Representative Long, for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And talking about raising children in that type of environment, I was in China a few years ago, and one of the young ladies that works at the American Embassy in Beijing there, you with me?
Yeah, I'm sorry.
What was I asking you?
What's that? You were in Beijing and you were talking to a person there.
Young lady.
Yes.
That, been there 4 years and had 2 children since she'd been working at our American Embassy in Beijing. And I asked her, I said, why would you have children in this environment? I'm sure you've traveled to Beijing many times. You cannot see across the street. And everyone, I think, has come around to the idea that climate change is real, and we do need to do what we can to protect the environment and protect 2 young kids like hers there in Beijing, not to mention all of the people in China that are raising their children with that kind of a environment where you literally can't see across the street. Did you say you drive a electric car?
Yes, mostly the State Patrol drives, but on occasion I sneak in a little trip.
But
a GM Bolt.
You ride in a GM Colt?
Bolt, B as in boy, yeah.
Bolt, is that 100% electric?
Yes, yes.
Okay. What's your range on that?
It's 238 miles, and I know that because we just upgraded. My last one was 160, and so now it's 238.
All right, well, I use 300 miles, so my math is going to be off, but if my governor, Mike Parson, in Jefferson City, Missouri, wanted to come see you in Olympia, it would take, at 300 miles, it would take I'm assuming you have to charge it overnight, but it'd take about 7 days to come see you in Olympia. And if I drove a gasoline engine, it'd take 1 day and 5 hours. So while we have to address this, still we have to keep practical things in mind, in my opinion. And driving a vehicle from Jefferson City, Missouri to Olympia, Washington over a period of 7 days, I understand why you flew here today. And as you said, most of us flew here. You testified that you would support the will of the people with regard to the removal of hydroelectric dams. Is that correct?
What I said is we're developing, what we're doing is we're under a federal court order to review the usage of the Snake River dams. And as part of that process, we have just started a task force at my request, which is going to have citizens from across the state evaluate the pros and cons of potential removal and breaching of the dams. And that's a process that's just in its infancy, and this is in response to a federal court order to evaluate that. We have made some changes in the operations of the dams already to try to increase fish flows so more water's coming down so that the salmon have more survival. As you know, we have some endangered species in that river system, and we're trying to recover our orcas as well that are very much endangered.
But you would support the will of the people in regard to that if they want to remove hydroelectric dams, correct?
I would.
That's what you're
I'm sorry?
I thought that's what you testified to earlier here.
Well, we're not. There's no initiative where the will of the people are going to have any up or down vote. The will of the people will be expressed through our democratic process.
If they did have an up or down vote on an issue, would you support the will of the people?
Well, if it's the law of the state of Washington, of course I would respect the law of the state of Washington. But there is another entity involved, and that's the federal courts. And the federal courts now have ruled that we have an obligation to investigate the potential removal of the dams. That's a judicial decision, and we are bound by that judicial decision. We are also under a judicial decision to improve our culverts. We have culverts that block fish passage.
Okay, I'm running short on time. Let me get in another question here of concern to me in my home state of Missouri, and that's keeping transportation costs low is crucial for both my constituents and industries like trucking and agriculture, which we have a lot of in the state of Missouri, and they're very prevalent in my district. Washington State has the highest gas prices behind only California and Hawaii. Missouri, on the other hand, is always in the top 10, usually lower than that, on gas prices for premium gas, and diesel is the cheapest in the country. How do the policies that you advocate for keep transportation costs low for rural districts like my own?
Well, when you drive an electric car, your transportation fuel is about 80% cheaper than when you're driving a gasoline-powered car. It is a sweet deal. The price of gasoline, when I drive my car, is zero because I don't use any gasoline. And that's a pretty sweet deal, and it's a sweet ride.
Yeah,
and
seven days to get to Olympia's stretch, too, so thank you. I yield back.
We'll welcome you to land at SeaTac Airport.
Yeah. The gentleman yields back. The chair now recognizes the representative from the state of New York, gentlewoman from the state of New York, Representative Clark, for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I thank our ranking member, and it's so good to see you back here, Governor. And I'm really excited about your passion around this issue. I want to thank Governor Inslee for testifying before us today. Your leadership on climate change has inspired other states to step up to the plate, and it's time for the Congress to do the same. I happen to co-chair with Ms. Brooks of Indiana the Smart Cities, Smart Communities Caucus, where I believe that there's a sweet spot, if you will, on the confluence of renewable sources, technology, as part of a sustainable 21st century energy delivery infrastructure. Have you given any thought to, as we're going through our conversations about infrastructure, we talk about the grid oftentimes, we've oftentimes heard of smart grids. There's so much that technology avails us of today, whether it's sensors that give us an indication of high CO2 in certain congested areas. There's a whole host of things. And when you're talking about different renewable sources, how we can look at sort of the development of ways in which we can maximize on that through our electric grid and through smart technology. Have you given any thought to that? Have you had any conversations around that?
You bet. And one of the things we're really proud of is the development of systems that can manage the grid much more effectively to integrate renewable energy and use storage capacity together. So I mentioned the Clean Energy Development Fund that we had. One of the companies that's coming out of this is now developing software to help manage the integration of electric batteries with the grid, and that's moving forward very, very rapidly. Spokane, Washington has a system of trying to have an integrated system, and that's becoming more and more important because we also are developing better battery technology. And this is kind of the holy grail, actually, of renewable energy. Solar's coming down 80%. Wind is coming down 20%. Now we need to continue the improvement of battery technology. And that's happening. I'll tell you just one little story. I had a young fella come in from Jackson High School a few months ago. He won the National Science Prize for the most scientifically productive high schooler in America, or one of the few. And he said, look, I want to do something about climate change. And so he went out and he said, what's the most important thing I can do in clean energy? And he said, well, it's developing a better membrane for a battery that has better density and more heat management system. So this guy at age 17 or 18 went and built and invented a new kind of membrane that now has some real commercial possible potential. That type of innovation is going on like crazy, and it's putting people to work in my state.
And when we talk about sort of creating that infrastructure, it would also address the concern that Mr. Long had about how you travel across a wide swath of area, given the life of a battery in one particular car. If you have an infrastructure where individuals are able to swap out cars, say, in a particular area where we have cars charging, then you get across a large state fairly rapidly. That's a whole new industry that, if we're creative enough, can be developed while we're decreasing our use of fossil fuels. So I think it's really just a matter, and I'd love to get your thoughts on it, on ways in that we're bringing up new industry while phasing out older.
So Mr. Long was talking about electric cars. And I think electric cars are kind of an interesting example. And by the way, in Representative Long's district last year, 2,268 people bought electric cars. So you got 2,000 people that like them, and there's been a 97% increase in the electrical car purchase in Representative Long's district last year. So there's people that are getting this across the country. But here's a story about electric cars. In about 2007, 2008 maybe, I asked General Motors to bring their Volt to Congress to show my colleagues what was coming. And when they brought it, we wheeled it off on the backside of the Longworth building. They brought it in a U-Haul truck because it didn't even have an engine in it. This was just 10 years ago. And my buddies came down and looked at it and said, Inslee, what are you doing? This is like a little toy here. It doesn't even have an engine in it. It's just a shell. This is ridiculous. This was only 10 years ago, okay? Now you got the governor of Washington driving one and thousands of people doing it. We're increasing, we're in the map to hit 500,000. So this is moving so fast in this technology. Today, when I bought the first Bolt, a year and a half ago, the range was 160. The second version is 238, okay, today. I don't know what it's gonna be a year from now, but it's going up. So we ought to be optimistic about this and get this
Thank you,
deployed.
Mr. Inslee. My time is up, and I yield back to our
the
chairman.
gentlelady-
Thank you so much. I look forward to further conversations with
The
you.
gentlelady yields back. I'll remind all of us that the governor has a hard stop at noon, I believe, so if we can stay within that framework. The chair now recognizes the gentleman from Texas, Representative Flores, for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and I appreciate the governor being here for his testimony today. I want to say, Governor, there's one area where I totally agree with you. Well, let's say two areas. One is, like you've heard from most of the panel, we all agree that climate change is real. We all agree that man is having some impact on that. I also agree with you that we need to look at investment in R&D. R&D is where we develop the seed corn for the economy that's 10 to 20 years down the road. From a personal perspective, I am the largest residential producer of solar-generated electricity, solar power in Brazos County, Texas. I'm pleased with that. I did this 10 years ago when it was still expensive to do it. And I was just looking at my little app here, and it says I produced over 70% of my power for the last 7 days. I've also converted about 95% of my lighting to LED, so I put my money where my mouth is when it comes to trying to reduce my environmental footprint. I was going through your testimony, and in it, it says that you want to transform your electricity system over the next decade to phase out coal-fired power by 2025 and increase the amount of renewable energy resources like solar and wind by 2030, and you want to be 100% clean by 2045. Where will you get the baseload power to do that? Because solar and wind are intermittent. Where will you get your baseload power?
Well, we have considerable different sources, and they all, when they can be integrated, they can become baseload power. And that's the great magic of storage systems that we're developing.
So storage is part of the solution.
Storage is part of the solution, big part.
Come back to that in a minute. Also, one of the things, I want to go off on a tangent for a minute, and you hear you say that your bill is part of a package of legislation to leap further and faster into the clean energy economy. One of the things you said it includes is the use of cleaner transportation fuels. Can you elaborate on that for a minute? I imagine my friend Mr. Shimkus and I would be interested in that.
We have a whole host of alternatives that provide us cleaner transportation systems. We have electric vehicles, which are much cleaner than fossil fuel burning vehicles. We have biofuels-driven vehicles where biofuels have a lower carbon footprint, many of the biofuels.
Okay.
We also have transportation systems, public transportation systems, that are extremely efficient in low-carbon transportation systems. And finding a way to use all or some of those are very effective ways. And trip reduction is an important low-carbon reduction opportunity as well that we're having a lot of success in.
In terms of fuels, you're talking about biofuels as well. We'll drill into that offline somewhere. I'd like to get your ideas on what you think about biofuels. You also talk about having an acceleration of deployment of electric vehicles on your roads and electrification of passenger ferries. And you talk about putting you on track to reach a goal of 50,000 electric cars on the roads by the end of the year. How are you doing versus that goal of 50,000 electric cars?
We're on track to our ultimate goal. And by the way, I forgot to mention, we hope to build the first electric ferries in what I believe will be the Western Hemisphere. We think that's both from a health and cost-effective policy. Our electrification of our transportation fleet is going well because we've had several
I have a shortage of time, so I'm going to run. Mr. Chairman, if you don't mind, I'd like to request unanimous consent to introduce 4 exhibits into the record today. The first one is by the Institute for Energy Research. It's entitled China's New Environmental Problem Battery Disposal. The next one is by engineering.com. It says, will your electric cars save the world or wreck it? The third one is by Amnesty International, where Amnesty challenges industry leaders to clean up their batteries. The fourth is the mounting solar panel waste problem. The challenge is that every time we try to come up with a new solution, that it creates an environmental problem, and I think we need to be responsible when we do that. Batteries and silicon have an environmental impact. We need to deal with that. In order to make lithium batteries, we also create slave labor problems in certain third world countries and also huge environmental problems. This all leads me to where I want to go, and that is we really want to have zero emissions, baseload capable power we need to look again at next generation nuclear. That is the key to having zero emissions. That's the clean to have baseload power. Solar panels can't do it without batteries. Wind can't do it without batteries. The only two sources that can do it are hydro and nuclear. Hydro seems to have its own set of environmental challenges these days. So I think we need to look at nuclear, Mr. Chairman. I haven't heard much about that in these conversations, and I hope that we do. I yield back.
The gentleman yields back. The chair now recognizes the gentleman from California, Representative Ruiz, for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Chairman. Governor Inslee, it's great to see you here today. It is good to see you back in the committee where you served, and thank you for coming to discuss local and state initiatives and policies to address the pressing issue of climate change. I represent California's 36th congressional district. A bit biased, I think it's the best district in our nation. It produces the most renewable energy on federal land in the country. We produce the most renewable energy on federal land in the entire United States. Last year, the city of Palm Springs, located in my congressional district, was designated as a Soul Smart Gold City by the National League of Cities for its effort to incentivize and use solar energy. In fact, many of the cities, including Palm Desert, Indio, Cathedral City, have put solar panels throughout their city halls, parking structures, and other facilities. Even school districts. Rancho Mirage and Palm Desert have adopted solar ordinances for all new constructions, etc. So it's a very renewable energy friendly location, and I'm looking forward to see if there's any partnerships, communication structures, or anything that we could work together on. In addition, the San Gorgonio Pass, it's famous for its windmills, and the movies that you see of cars and motorcycles driving through the 10 is one of the windiest places in my district and California, and is home of nearly 2,000 wind turbines. Beautiful. And as you mentioned in your opening statement, the state of Washington is doing substantive work to promote renewable energy and strengthen our economy. Could you elaborate more on some of your successful renewable energy strategies you have implemented as governor, particularly in the solar and wind renewable energy industries?
Yes, I talked a little bit about this, but we've had a spectacular success with our renewable portfolio standard. And I say spectacular because we went from zero, essentially zero commercial wind energy, 11, 12 years ago, to a $6 billion industry in our state. You think, I mean...
How did you do that?
So our voters were wise enough to pass something I backed, which was a provision that says you basically needed 15% of your utilities to develop from these clean energy sources.
What did the state do? To incentivize this?
So it was a requirement for utilities, and it was resisted to some degree, who people did not think technology could solve this problem. But we developed from scratch a $6 billion industry. We also have a nascent solar industry, which a lot of people don't think of, Washington, but 2/3 of our state is kind of semi-arid. So now we're building solar farms, and one of the largest manufacturers of polysilicates that goes into solar cells is in Moses Lake, Washington. I think it's the largest manufacturer in the Western Hemisphere that supplies material that basically goes into solar cells. Some of it might be in Mr. Flores' rooftop right now.
Have you done anything in regards to the workforce? Because if that's the energy of the future, then we need to develop the workforce of the future. I introduced a bill called the Renewable Energy Jobs Act that will provide pilot programs for training individuals for employment in renewable energy and energy efficient industries on site in these companies. But have you done anything? Can you talk about any successful program in your state that promotes job growth and workforce training in the renewable energy industries?
Yes, in fact, we have a program we call Career Connect Washington. We're building a whole new avenue of career success because we think we've made a mistake telling people if you don't get a 4-year degree, you're a failure. That's just wrong. The most rapidly growing two jobs is solar installer and wind turbine technician, and those are good paying jobs right now. We want to make sure they are. So we're building whole new apprenticeship protocols for development. in our community colleges with our unions. I was recently at the IBEW training programs that are so successful. I think it was in Portland where I had 1,000, they have 1,000 apprenticeships, many of them in the solar part of that training program. So we know we can set people up for really successful careers.
So what can we do in Congress to help states like yours in California and other places to develop this workforce and to foster more of the solar and wind energies?
Well, you can adopt federally what we have adopted, which will create a demand for these new careers. We certainly are always looking for financial support for our higher ed facilities that are involved in these training programs. And we know that we have helped to try to help people finance these programs. We have one of the richest financial support networks for people in college, but we could always use a little help.
Excellent. I yield back my time.
The gentleman yields back. The chair recognizes the gentleman from Oklahoma, Mr. Mullen, for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Governor, thank you for being here. A couple of questions for you, and I'm going to try to reserve some time for my good friend from Montana. You're supporting eliminating all fossil fuels by the end of 2045, correct?
In the grid, that's the goal.
In the grid.
Yeah.
So, and you're proposing eliminating electric coal in less than 6 years, correct?
I'm sorry, you said
electric generated coal.
In our state, we're closing the remaining coal-fired plant.
And you're replacing those with what?
A whole host of different systems, including efficiency. It's one of the things we haven't mentioned here today. The first.
No, what are you replacing it with?
Efficiency,
Like
solar power, hydro, public transportation, electric cars, biofuel, the whole mix. And this is an important issue.
Would you consider you're an all-the-above energy guy, where you're looking to bring stability, for reliable, low cost, or reliable cost to homes and businesses? Would you consider yourself an all-the-above person?
I'm not sure what you mean, but all above.
Not about all the above, like you're not really interested in picking winners and losers, but letting the consumer have choice. Because the state of Washington is drastically different than, let's say, the state of Oklahoma or the state of Montana, where hydro may work for you, wind and solar may work for you, but there's parts of the country where it won't work. So what would you do about the states where it doesn't work? Because it's about reliability. I mean, if you were to take all the fossil fuels off the market to generate electricity, and you only had solar and wind, you would have to have 12% of the land mass just to cover that. That's the size of Texas. So are you really proposing that?
Yeah, we are proposing in my
Where are you going to get the 12% of the land?
We're proposing in my state to move.
Where are you going to get the 12% of the land? Because you are running for a higher office. So where would you get the 12% of the land?
Well, to start with, I don't know if you've heard me, but I've said I support research and development in multiple fields to try to develop other.
So you are all the above then?
If that's how you define it.
Well, I mean, if you really want to eliminate fossil fuels, then that's not all the above. So either you are or you aren't.
Well, look at. I just want to be straight with you.
I'm trying to give you an opportunity to be straight, and you haven't been yet.
The first order of business is to set a goal. And the goal is...
But your goal is already set. You want to eliminate all fossil fuels by 2045. That's your goal. So where are you going to get the land mass to be able to eliminate all fossil fuels? Because if you just depend on batteries for storage, because we know that wind doesn't always blow and the sun isn't always shining, so where are you going to store it? We're going to rely on China for the special metals that it's going to take to develop the batteries to which you're going to store?
As far as I can tell, you're in the same league with the President of the United States, who's never heard of batteries. We have a thing called batteries. Let me finish.
No,
let me finish. Let me finish one question.
Don't accuse me of saying that I'm in some type of league. Don't do that to me. I'm asking you a question. If you're really about batteries, then you're about the dependency. I'm all the above type guy. I'm all about the storage. I have no problem with that. But if you only go to one area where it's going to rely on storage of power when the sun isn't shining and the wind isn't blowing, then where are you going to get the resources? Doesn't that require mining?
We have abundant sources, and what we are finding in our state, And these are the arguments I heard when we had the renewable portfolio standard.
It's not an argument, it's a real question.
People argued that it was impossible to integrate
Sir,
these systems.
it's not an argument. It's a real
I can't
question.
have an argument because you won't let me answer my question.
With that, I'm going to yield to
I'll
the
have
gentleman
one
from
later.
Montana.
I thank the gentleman. And Governor, thank you for being here. You testified today that you're going to ban coal-fired electricity in your state. I appreciate that. My time is short here. I just want to highlight the fact that, today in your state house, you're considering a bill that would eliminate all coal-fired electricity. Much of this electricity is generated in Montana, and particularly in the town of Colstrip. It's a small town, 2,300 people. Their livelihoods are threatened. You testified today that your policies have had no detrimental effect on any community. And Mr. Chairman, I'd like to enter into the record this report from, if there's no objection, June 2018, the economic impact of early retirement of Colstrip Units 3 and 4. That report by the University of Montana shows that Montana would lose over $5 billion in revenue. Montana would lose nearly 2/3, 3,300 jobs, and our population would go down by 7,000 people. And I would just offer that those are devastating impacts of your policy on Montana and our communities. You've also opposed building of a coal plant. I don't think that in your position as governor, you have jurisdiction over Japan. Japan wants to buy our coal. I think it's a constitutional issue. So I'm here just to state that, closer to home, we have real issues with these policies, and I appreciate you being here, Governor, and I hope my colleagues can learn from, honestly, Washington's state's mistakes instead of repeating them on a national level, and that I yield back.
Let me comment on this. I would suggest that you look at the model that we have for the transition of our coal-fired plant in Centralia, Washington. I think you'll find it's been very successful in helping that community through that transition because it was a consensus-based product. It involved a substantial investment to help the working people who were associated with it and the consumers and the small business people.
Governor, I would invite you to come to Colstrip, Montana with me to meet the people whose livelihoods you are extinguishing. You have my open invitation.
And I would invite you to come meet the people who are having trouble breathing because of coal-fired electricity pollution. These are the children of the state of Washington and the people whose houses are burning down. We both have constituents. All of them deserve our respect and attention. And I think if we work together, we can help them all.
Sir, I'd be happy to work with you. At this point, I take that as a no, you won't meet with the people of Colstrip. That's unfortunate.
I'm happy to discuss this with you further.
The gentleman yields. The chair now recognizes our last individual who asks questions here, and that will be Representative Schakowsky from the state of Illinois.
Well, I am so happy to be with my former colleague and good friend, Governor Inslee, today. I wondered if you wanted to talk a little bit more. This is the basis, I think, of many of the debates. Are we sacrificing jobs and communities for what I see as an existential threat from global warming and problems? Is there a way for us to balance that?
Well, I appreciate an opportunity to say that. The way I look at this is there's a greater risk that we will lose jobs because we're not capturing here and they go to China and Germany. These jobs are going to be created. We are going to create millions of jobs because we have no choice but to do so. We know that over the next several decades, we need to build a new clean energy system in the United States and worldwide. And so there's going to be millions of jobs in these industries. I want them to be in the United States and Washington State, not just China and Germany. And that's the central issue. We know that humans, I don't think, are consciously going to allow this place to become uninhabitable. I don't think we should. So this is a question of where the jobs are going to be created, not whether they are going to be created. And the central lesson I would share with you on my trip here is that they are being created when we have smart policies to build them. And the people that I know now working in these clean energy sources, some of whom are children of my friends of 60 years, is really exciting for me to see these new careers. A young family, a widow, she lost her husband. I got to know this family well. Now their kid's working in the solar industry, making polysilicate that goes into solar panels. The folks that used to be in the timber industry now doing biofuels in Grays Harbor. This is exciting when you get people to have new careers. And that's what this effort is about. And I'm just here saying we ought to have confidence to be able to do that. Now, I think it'll help when both parties propose solutions to actually do that. I look forward to that happy day when the spirit of Teddy Roosevelt is here on both sides.
Thank you. Because I think we're going to have to deal with this issue as we go forward if we want bipartisanship, and I appreciate your answer. My governor, new governor, Governor Pritzker, has joined the Climate Alliance, and I wanted to ask you about it. From your perspective, what has motivated many states to join the Climate Alliance?
Well, in part, election returns motivate people on occasion because they've seen people who've been elected recently. 7 governors, new governors were elected on our side, and they all recognize the importance of acting on climate change. Your governor has joined the alliance and taken some actions on I believe it's a 25% move towards clean energy in the grid, I believe, if I'm not mistaken. We're looking at advances in wind and solar in Nevada and New Mexico. We're just looking at people seeing success. I think success is what has inspired people to move forward, and that's why I've come here in confidence.
So is this a matter, this Climate Alliance, a matter of sharing information so that states can move forward without having to reinvent the wheel?
So we formed the alliance for several reasons. One, to share information, share policy, share experiencing, share things that don't work so that we can learn from each other's mistakes, and that's been very successful. Second, it was formed to make sure that the rest of the world does not give up on the United States. We wanted the rest of the world that is moving forward to know that we are still moving forward in our country, and we are. This group represents over 60% of the economy of the United States. That has worked. The rest of the world is continuing to move forward in the Paris Agreement, so it's been successful in that regard. And I've enjoyed working on a bipartisan basis. As I said, we have 3 governors in this effort, and we're working together. I hope that happens here too.
What is the consequence, do you see? Are there practical consequences of the United States pulling out of the Paris Accord?
Jobs going overseas, and I don't want to see that. I want to see these jobs right here, and I hope this Congress will help them do that.
Okay, I see
Thank
you
you
looking
for your leadership.
I see you looking at the clock, Governor, and I don't want to keep you any longer, but I really appreciate your leadership on this issue, which I do see as an existential issue for humanity. Thank you.
Thank you.
The gentlelady yields back. That concludes our first panel. We again thank you, Governor Inslee, the Honorable Jay Inslee, for joining us to testify on Washington State's efforts to combat climate. And at this time, I will ask that staff prepare the witness table such that we may begin our second panel shortly. Let's take that 5-minute recess to get that done.
Yes, sir. Did you have fun? Always. It's great to see you. Good luck.
Flores, Jerry Morales, Mayor of Midland, Texas.
Hey, Jim, how are you?
Good, yes. I wanted to say hello. Oh, doing great.
Glad you're here.
Yeah, thank you for the invitation. I just wanted to say thank you.
Talk about some comments.
Yeah, it's been pretty interesting thus far. Yeah. So, yeah, doing well. Thank you for serving and all you do.
Oh, you bet. Yeah, by the way, you got a great guy representing my cause.
Oh, yes.
What, a couple of little factoids
Yes.
where you may not know. He and I are the only 2 oil and gas CPAs in Congress. We're both in oil and gas, with some C-level positions, and both the CPAs.
interesting.
Didn't know if you knew that.
I did not know that. Yeah, he's a great congressman. He does well for our area. So, as you, thank you very much. It's an honor to be here. Thank you.
You betcha. Oh, the publication? They're not friends here. They're not, okay. See what you come up with.
We gotta get hot first. We gotta see this.
All right, sounds good.
It's hot. Great. These are gonna get hot. Test, test. This one was good. Test, test. Yeah, put them on.
Yeah, there's.
I think he's still just working the audio.
Don't worry.
You're next.
Okay. Should we start with that?
Yeah, we're on the clock.
Okay, we're going to start with our second panel. We'll hear from a group of local leaders from across our country who will share their work in combating climate change in their local communities. Those leaders include, from my left, the Honorable Steve Benjamin, Mayor of the City of Columbia, South Carolina. We are, oh, here we go. Welcome, Mayor. Next to him is our other mayor, the Honorable Jerry F. Morales, Mayor of the City of Midland, Texas. We then have the Honorable Jackie Biskupski. Okay. Mayor of the City of Salt Lake City, Utah. The Honorable Daniel C. Camp III, Chair of the Beaver County Board of Commissioners, Beaver County, Pennsylvania. And then we have the Honorable James Brainerd, Mayor of the City of Carmel, Indiana. We want to thank our witnesses for joining us today. We look forward to your testimony. We'll be recognizing each of you for 5 minutes. I will make the note that we'll recognize that Honorable Steve Benjamin needs to, he's got a hard time to leave, a hard 12:45 by which he needs to leave. We're welcoming him here, and he needs to get back to South Carolina for city business, so we'll try to do as much business here as possible. We'll begin with perhaps Mayor Benjamin first, and again, we welcome all of our panelists here. Mayor, the opportunity for you is to be recognized for 5 minutes now.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Chairman Tonko, Ranking Member Shimkus, the members of the subcommittee, my friend Congressman Duncan from South Carolina. Thank you for allowing me to get in and get out of here. We believe in South Carolina also in government by ambush. So if I'm not at a city council meeting tonight, I don't know what happens. So I'm going to make sure I get back home. Thank you for this opportunity to testify before the subcommittee. Climate change is perhaps the biggest challenge we face as a nation, as a people, and I'm pleased that the subcommittee is holding this hearing. My name is Steve Benjamin. I serve as mayor of Columbia, South Carolina, the capital of our state, a thriving and diverse city, home to over 134,000 people and the hub of a metropolitan area of over 800,000 citizens. In addition to state government, Columbia hosts nearly 50,000 students attending the University of South Carolina, Columbia College, two historically black colleges, universities, Benedict College and Allen University. And we're also the proud home to Fort Jackson, the Army's largest training base in the country, which trains approximately 45,000 soldiers per year. For the past year, I've had the honor of representing my fellow mayors throughout the country as president of the United States Conference of Mayors. At the national level, I also serve as chairman of Municipal Bonds for America, co-chair of the Sierra Club's bipartisan Mayors for 100% Clean Energy Initiative, and as a past president of the African American Mayors Association. I've been fortunate to serve in these national leadership positions at a moment when mayors and local government officials have attained renewed prominence and have been widely recognized as being in the forefront of public policy innovation, including climate change. However, we cannot tackle this challenge alone. We need a strong federal partner, and I hope this hearing will be the first step in the development of a climate action program, one that recognizes and bolsters the efforts mayors and cities are taking to address this existential challenge. As with so much of what mayors and cities do, our leadership on climate change has been pragmatic. Mayors and cities, Republican, Democrats, Independents, have been pragmatic because we have no choice. Climate change is already impacting our communities and testing our infrastructure. We have acted because our constituents expect us to tackle challenges and fix problems while also delivering a balanced budget on time each year. In Columbia, unfortunately, we witnessed firsthand in 2015, over 3 days in October, the remnants of Hurricane Joaquin stalled over central South Carolina, inundating Columbia with nearly 30 inches of rain. Across the Carolinas, 12 trillion gallons of water fell. Hurricane Joaquin's impact on Columbia was dire, taking the lives of precious South Carolinians. In addition, the storm nearly wiped out the Columbia Canal, which serves as our main drinking water treatment plant, ruptured dozens of water and sewer mains, closed over 100 streets, flooded one fire station and our primary fire training facility, breached multiple dams, and damaged nearly 400 homes and 60 businesses. Since then, we've had several other major rain events. Though Joaquin was a 500-year event, heavy rain events are apparently becoming the new normal. Like cities throughout our country, the City of Columbia has been addressing climate change on several fronts for over a decade. In 2009, with assistance from the Energy Efficiency and Conservation Block Grant, we conducted an energy audit and implemented several of the audit's recommendations, including upgrading lighting systems, HVAC upgrades on city buildings, and installing solar panels on fire stations. These projects reduce our greenhouse gas emissions and energy consumption and save Columbia taxpayers approximately $337,000 per year. In addition, one of my first priorities when I took office was to upgrade and rationalize our regional transportation system to increase ridership. We've also accelerated our efforts to deliver more pedestrian and bicycle infrastructure throughout our city. Combined with thousands of new units being deployed and opened in downtown Columbia, this has set the stage for us to truly offer meaningful options to the car, with the added bonus of creating a vibrant, lively, and beautiful downtown. 2 years ago, Columbia took the next step setting a target of powering our community with 100% clean and renewable energy by 2035. In addition to our climate change prevention efforts, we've been actively addressing mitigation. We bit the bullet and increased stormwater fees to fund a wide array of projects to improve our stormwater system using both gray and green infrastructure. We also issued our first ever green bond in December, allowing the city to finance upgrades and improvements to our stormwater system, earning the first climate bond initiative certification of a standalone stormwater project in the country. We worked hard in Columbia, as cities have throughout the country. But I'm here today to tell you that mayors and cities alone cannot tackle this challenge. We need a strong federal partner. I've attached to my testimony a 2007 open letter to presidential candidates signed by 100 mayors from across South Carolina, including my predecessor, calling for federal leadership on climate change. That letter's 12 years old, asking for a strong federal partner. Since then, the need for action has become that much more urgent. I'm also very pleased that Chairman Tonko has issued a blueprint for action, a framework for climate action in the United States Congress. And we're particularly pleased that the framework empowers state and local governments and strengthens community resilience and certainly avoids harm to first movers. We recognize that it takes bold leadership and bold action to make some moves here first. In January, the Conference of Mayors released its own Mayor's Call for Climate Action that's included as an attachment to my written testimony. I would respectfully suggest that some of our specific proposals provide Congress a way to flesh out and implement some of Chairman Tonko's framework in a manner that would help mayors and cities meet the climate challenge. Many of these proposals could be implemented and produce results quickly while Congress debates a larger package or more comprehensive climate strategy that helps meet the needs of our respective communities all across the country. These include, as I conclude, reauthorizing and fully funding the Energy Efficiency and Conservation Block Grant Program in fiscal year 2020 and beyond, establishing and implementing a national greenhouse gas emission reduction standard by 2030, adopt an aggressive national renewable portfolio standard and provide incentives for electric utilities, including municipal electric utilities, to invest in clean and renewable energy, direct the EPA to maintain and improve CAFE standards, provide incentives to the energy sector to ramp up in research and investments in renewable energy, modernize the nation's electric utility grids, to provide transportation funding to help metropolitan areas and local areas invest in low-carbon, mode-neutral transportation options via increased funding for the Surface Transportation Block Grant, increased funding for transit, invest in improved intercity passenger rail.
Mr. Mayor,
yes, sir.
I need you to wrap up.
Oh, yes, sir. And I'll close with this. One major issue, Congress has shown leadership in preserving the tax exemption in municipal bonds that allows us to deliver the infrastructure. We did, however, make a mistake in the Tax Cut and Jobs Act by removing the ability to advance refund bonds and save us money as we deliver on that infrastructure, the vast majority of American infrastructure. We need that addressed by Congress. Thank you for the opportunity to testify. I hope our testimony and the attachments in the much larger proposal can give Congress some ideas to quickly implement and help bolster our local government efforts. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Good to see you again, and thank you for appearing before the subcommittee. Next, we'll move to Mayor Morales, please. You're recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you. It's an honor to be here, Congresswomen and Congressmen. Thank you very much. Exciting to be able to be here to represent Midland, Texas, West Texas, and the Permian Basin. I am Mayor Jerry Morales, been in office for 6 years and been on City Council since 2008, so you can't understand how honored I am to represent the city of my hometown, Midland, Texas. Midland, Texas, also known as the Tall City. Many would think that a city out there in the middle of the desert would not have any tall buildings. Very similar to a city of Houston, Texas, but on a smaller scale. Size of 165,000 people. City of Midland itself is approximately 90 square miles. Since 2014, Midland has been ranked one of the largest and fastest growing cities in the nation. Fastest growing cities in the nation, not the largest, right? During this time, we are home to 20 major oil and exploration companies. The Permian Basin is a large sedimentary basin in the southern western part of the United States of America. The Greater Permian Basin comprises several components of basins. Of these, Midland is the largest, the Delaware Basin is the second largest, and the Marfa Basin is the smallest. The Permian Basin covers more than 86,000 square miles and extends across an area approximately 250 miles wide and 300 miles long. The Permian Shale is one of the top 5 producing shales in the world and soon will be in the top 2. To date, the Permian Shale transports 3 million barrels of crude oil per day, and by the summer of 2019 may be transporting 4.5 million, and by 2020, when transportation lines could hit over 6 million barrels of oil a day. Permian Basin is already a star, but now it will even shine brighter. What the U.S. Geological Survey numbers mean is that the Permian Basin is the largest single reservoir oil and gas in the United States of America and is also one of the largest on a local soil. We are challenged, of course, being a shining star and growing so fast. Today, one of the issues challenging Midland is 15,000 oil workers are lacking in our industry. In the last, Midland's unemployment rate for the last 6 years has been on an average of 1.9 to 2.55%, which makes this one of the lowest unemployments in the nation. Midland also has a housing crisis due to the influx of oil and gas family moving into the area. Our inventory as of today has less than 300 homes, where 2 years ago we had more than 3,000 homes. The Midland-Odessa area recently came out of a 7-year drought, and during that drought, Midland reduced its water consumption by 20%. We call it the blue gold. During that drought, and even today, the oil companies played a responsible part in retracting their need of water for production by going under the Ogallala Reservoir and pulling the brackish water and repurposing it for their own industrial use. These oil companies are not allowed to use municipalities' water resources, and in the last 100 years, there have not been any incidents of earthquakes or tremors that have been associated with drilling activity in the Permian Basin. Air quality has always been maintained a good bill of health, probably due to our West Texas tornadic winds that we have out there, so it keeps it kind of fresh and clear. Property values have increased, sales tax receipts are at record highs, and businesses have seen 15 to 25% growth in their respective businesses. 2 years in a row, Midland has been ranked 3rd by the Smart Assets as the best city in the nation for living an American dream. The Permian Basin Board of Realtors reported that the average price for a home was sold more than $269,000, and Midland has a median income of $75,000. Mr. Sheffield, CEO of Pioneer Resource, stated that the sustainable operation could continue for a minimum of 10 to 15 years. With this recent announcement, Pioneer and the City of Midland entered into a public-private partnership where Pioneer will spend in excess of $130 million to rehabilitate the city's secondary and water treatment plant. The City of Midland will then sell this treated water back to Pioneer to be used for operational purposes. This partnership will save taxpayers money, ensure that Midland has treated water in case of another drought, and reduce truck traffic through transportation lines and for infrastructure uses. While methane emissions have been raised as concerns by detractors of the industry, the large majority of methane emissions from production of the Permian Basin centers around flaring necessitated by lack of takeaway capacity. However, there is an estimated 14 billion cubic feet per day of additional natural gas pipeline capacity that is scheduled to come online in the Permian Basin by the end of 2022, according to the Texans of Natural Gas. Once these pipelines are in place, even with increased production, methane emissions in the field will be greatly reduced. The entire Permian Basin is a region larger than the states of like Alabama. With such a large footprint, you can find diversity of people and communities. Some companies are also contracting with cities like Midland-Odessa to use their wastewater in these recycling processes. Even in the relatively sparse populated Permian Basin, there are concerns about protecting our native species and their habitats. Unprecedented efforts such as the range-wide plan for the lesser prairie chicken, which covers 5 states including Texas, New Mexico, Oklahoma, Kansas, and Colorado, as well as more localized conservation plans for species like the dune sagebrush lizard and the Texas hornshell mussel. Municipalities do not regulate downhole drilling, nor do they control where water comes from the drilling fracking process. The state of Texas agencies regulate these areas. The City of Midland does not encourage operators to use water from deeper depths, being the Santa Rosa water instead of freshwater aquifers. In addition, many operators are reclaiming water production, which is produced as a byproduct of oil and gas production. Diamondback Resources has switched to an alternative of deep burial pits recently, which meets state guidelines to a more environmental alternative of biotechnology treatment, which is a pit remediation process. The pit closure will meet or exceed the requirements of the applicable Railroad Commission rules and Texas Commission of Environmental Quality. So these are some ideas to show that what we are doing in West Texas and Midland is working with our 20 majors, being responsible of not only the environment, the climate, but of our communities and the people who work there and live there. We're excited that our shale is not only productive economically for the city of Midland, but for the state of Texas, the United States of America, and even the world. Thank you for the opportunity to be here to speak.
Thank you, Mayor. We're supposed to have votes around 1 o'clock, so I'm going to ask that everyone stay strictly to the 5-minute time frame so that we can get questions in. Next, we'll move to the Honorable Jackie Biskupski of the City of Salt Lake City. Welcome.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chair and members of the committee. It is an honor to be here before you. I come as the mayor of Salt Lake City, home to over 200,000 residents, including my 2 sons, Archie and Jack. I mention them because my plea to you today has everything to do with their future and the future of millions of young people like them in America's cities. As both a mayor and a mother, I am working to protect the health and well-being of all people as the causes and effects of climate change are felt across the state of Utah. Surrounded by the towering peaks of the Wasatch and Oquirrh Mountains, my city is beautiful on most days. 30 years ago, I arrived in Salt Lake City for a ski trip, and I never left. Unfortunately, each year since, during the hot summer months and the cool winters, our air is filled with a dirty haze we know as the dreaded inversion. On these days, parents along the Wasatch Front send their kids to school wearing face masks to protect them from the harmful pollution trapped in the air. This pollution, almost half of which is caused by vehicle emissions, impacts our quality of life almost daily and is contributing to the long-term effects of climate change, such as wildfires and droughts. Some of you may know of Salt Lake City as the winter sports paradise. As the host city of the 2002 Winter Olympic and Paralympic Games, and now the USOC's choice to host a future Winter Games, Salt Lake City is, without question, the U.S. capital of winter sports. This distinction helps drive nearly $1.3 billion to our state's economy. Our water and winter sports industry are partners in driving thousands of jobs, driving tourism and businesses into the region. So you can imagine how alarmed we are when reports indicate we have lost 5 weeks of snowpack just in the last 20 years. Surface water, such as snow, also makes up the vast majority of our drinking water. And although Salt Lake City population is just over 200,000 people, the city provides water to more than 1 million people in our valley. With every degree of warming we experience, we estimate nearly a 4% decrease in overall water volume emanating from the streams and creeks in the Wasatch Mountains. As one of the fastest growing regions in the nation, we cannot afford to lose more of our snow. Yes, we have had a good winter this year, but we are still recovering from a 30-year low in 2018 and many years of drought. While I could go on discussing the issues we are facing, including the unprecedented wildfires we had in 2018, all of which is detailed in my written statement, I'd like to share with you what we are doing to act on climate change. In 2016, Salt Lake City became the 16th city in the nation to establish a 100% clean energy goal. To fulfill this pledge, we have taken action, including passing a cost-free energy benchmarking ordinance estimated to remove 29 tons of pollutants from the air annually. We are building green infrastructure, the first net zero public safety building in the nation, and just last year completed the first 2 net zero fire stations in the country. To reduce vehicle pollution, in 2018, Salt Lake City made the largest local investment to date in public transit, allowing us to implement the first phase of a multi-year strategy to create high-frequency bus networks across our city. Through savings and partnerships with Delta Airlines and the federal government, Salt Lake City is building a $3.6 billion international airport, which when completed will be LEED Gold certified. Perhaps most significantly, Salt Lake City, Park City, Moab, and Summit County have been working with our utility, Rocky Mountain Power, to establish a framework to allow our communities to have net 100% renewable electricity by 2030. This is an unprecedented collaborative effort between an investor-owned utility and the communities it serves. Just last Friday, Governor Gary Herbert signed into law the Community Renewable Energy Act, which is the legislation we needed to continue building this framework. I shared the successes with you today to highlight our investment by the federal government and how that could help us increase the action of our local communities. Thank you.
Thank you very much, and right within 5 minutes, so thank you. Next, we'll hear from the Honorable Daniel Camp III, who is the chair of Beaver County Board of Commissioners, Beaver County, Pennsylvania. Welcome.
Thank you. Thank you, Chairman Tomko, Ranking Member Shimkus, and members of the subcommittee for inviting me to speak today on behalf of Beaver County, Pennsylvania. It is an honor to be here in front of you, somewhere where my former congressman and dear friend Ron Klink served when he was a congressman here. My name is Daniel Camp, and I am the chairman of the Beaver County Board of Commissioners. Of the 67 counties in the great Commonwealth of Pennsylvania, I'm currently the youngest county chairman. I sit on the Natural Gas Task Force for the County Commissioners Association of Pennsylvania. About 25 miles northwest of Pittsburgh, Beaver County, Pennsylvania sits alongside the most northern part of the Ohio River and has approximately 168,000 residents. Throughout most of the 20th century, Beaver County and its steel mills laid the foundation for the United States and the world. We designed, manufactured, and produced steel used in bridges, skylines, and icons throughout our great nation. Beaver County rode this wave of economic growth throughout most of the 20th century. But eventually in the 1980s, our good fortune came tumbling down. American Steel turned its back on Beaver County. Mills shut down, unemployment peaked, but we persevered, we came back. We knew we had a foundation for a great restoration. Today, energy drives our economy. With an investment measured in the billions, we partnered with an engine that would fuel the nation. In Beaver County, we are proud of our past, but we are also confident in our energy future. The current energy boom in Beaver County started with the Marcellus Shale. Approximately 10 years ago, Beaver County started to see the effects of the technological advancements that made developing the Marcellus Shale possible. In addition to the billions of dollars in bonuses and royalty payments made to Pennsylvanians who leased their lands and property for natural gas extraction in 2012, the Pennsylvania General Assembly imposed a special tax on the industry called an impact fee, which is paid annually by the unconventional natural gas producers for each well drilled. In its report in 2018, Beaver County received approximately $500,000 from the impact fee, which was an increase of about $160,000 from the prior year. In addition, the county's 54 municipalities received a combined $618,000, nearly double the amount from the year before. All told, between allocations to the county, municipalities, and impact fee funded projects, Beaver County has received $5 million for the public infrastructure improvements, emergency preparedness and response, environmental protection, social services, parks and green spaces, and tax reduction. In 2016, Shell Chemical Appalachia announced it would build a petrochemical complex in Beaver County that would use low-cost ethane being produced from the Marcellus and Utica formations to produce 3.5 billion pounds of polyethylene per year, creating a foundation for the regional manufacturing, pharmaceutical, industrial chemical, and plastic. Indeed, from life-saving medication and medical equipment to the cell phones we use every day, plastic sourced in plays like the Marcellus enhance our quality of life to make our modern world possible. Shell's decision to build this complex in Beaver County was a major coup for not only Beaver County, but our entire region, including West Virginia and Ohio. And at its peak, 6,000 construction jobs will be necessary to build the complex, and once operational, it will support approximately 600 permanent, well-paying, family-sustaining jobs. The site currently supports hundreds of electricians, pipe fitters, iron workers, carpenters, laborers, equipment operators, and other craftsmen. Many of these workers travel from out of the area to the work site and have therefore spurred our hotel industry in Beaver County. We now have 33 hotels in the county when 10 years ago we had 4, many of which were built as a direct result of the influx of these workers who now spend their entertainment dollars locally, eat at local establishments, and otherwise have helped to revitalize local businesses. Infrastructure has also improved in and around the construction site. New roads and repaving of existing roads directly from the cracker plant. An improved interchange in the Interstate 376 was built to handle the additional traffic in the area. And additionally, a new water intake system was built for the local municipalities because the plant was built where their water intake system was previously located. Once the plant is operational, we anticipate additional growth in the manufacturing sector as our region becomes attractive for companies seeking to locate in close proximity to the abundant amount of supply of polyethylene produced in Beaver County. In turn, we hope to see the expansion of the professional services and that support as well, such as engineering and architecture. Beaver County has tremendous potential, and that potential stems in large part from the economic opportunity Marcellus Shale presents. Without a doubt, our modern world is built on energy, and our future hinges on the ability to leverage our domestic energy resources to fuel our economy, grow manufacturing, employ America's labor workforce, and continue to propel our county forward as a global leader. I am proud to represent a county that is integral to making this future possible. As you deliberate your policy changes, I am here to ask you to consider the monumental impact American shale gas development has had on our country and support this economic driver as vital to our shared future. In closing, I would like to thank you for this opportunity you have given me to come before you and speak today.
Thank you, Honorable Daniel Camp. And finally, we'll hear from the Honorable James Brainerd, who is Mayor of the City of Carmel, Indiana. Welcome.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, members of the subcommittee. Carmel is a city of about 100,000 people on the northern edge of Indianapolis. Has gone through tremendous transformation during the last few decades. Carmel consistently is ranked among the best places to live in the country, having been named the best place to live in America by CNN Money Magazine in 2012. That's a good day for a mayor. Carmel recently was ranked #1 best suburb to live in America by Niche.com, listed as one of the safest cities in America by SafeWise, and was named the #1 best place to launch a career by Money Magazine last year. And we're successfully making our community safer and healthier for our residents, businesses, and visitors through initiatives aimed at reducing pollution and harmful emissions. I've also shared our initiatives and the importance of building a resilient city more broadly, speaking to India in 2015 as part of a U.S. State Department initiative on climate change, and in Germany in 2015 as part of the German-American Institute discussing climate change mitigation and city management. I've also shown my support here nationally as one of the original signers of the Conference of Mayors Climate Protection Agreement, and ultimately, over 1,200 mayors from both parties throughout the United States signed into the agreement and pledged local efforts to help achieve greater reduction of harmful emissions. I've co-chaired the Conference of Mayors Energy Independence and Climate Protection Task Force. I've also learned a great deal as one of the few Republican members of President Obama's Task Force on Climate Preparedness and Resilience. All of these have been experiences that have broadened my perspective and understanding of the issues that we're facing. It's our job to find the best solutions that will yield the best results. More locally, for me, farms just outside of Carmel and throughout the state of Indiana have felt the impact of climate change. Purdue University's Climate Change Research Center released a report last year detailing the negative impact today's climate is having on our agriculture, including declining yields, a change in which crops will grow in the state, increased risk of heat stress to livestock, and the decreased quality of soils in general, which could impact food security for all of us. I'm often asked by younger Republicans and students, why as a Republican I'm strongly advocating for conservation and environmental initiatives. I remind them that the root of the word conservative is to conserve, and that many environmental initiatives have been initiated and implemented by Republicans. It was Teddy Roosevelt who preserved 230 million acres of wilderness and established 5 national parks, created the U.S. Forest Service. It was Richard Nixon, Republican, who signed into the National Environmental Policy Act, the Marine Mammal Protection Act, the Environmental Pesticide Control Act, and the Endangered Species Act, which along with banning DDT helped rescue the American bald eagle. It was Indiana's own William Ruckelshaus, a Republican, who was first head of the Environmental Protection Agency. It was Ronald Reagan, of course, a Republican, who enacted the Coastal Barrier Resource Act and the Water Resources Development Act. It was President George H. Bush, a Republican, who signed on to the Global Change Research Act in 1990, which requires that every 4 years an assessment of the findings be made and reported. I often tell our young Republicans that improving the environment doesn't have to take the form of regulations that hurt businesses or our economy. We need to search for answers that help our environment while presenting opportunities to encourage thousands of new green jobs that save energy or make renewable energy. We should be researching and developing products and technology that the citizens of this country and the rest of the world are demanding. And that's why I'm here today, though, to report on how communities such as Carmel are working to become as resilient as possible while dealing with the impact of poor air quality. For our cities, this is about the need to address global warming's impact on our stormwater, our utility systems, and other city services, including our emergency responses in the event of tornadoes, hurricanes, and other disasters. It's about developing better codes. So some of the things we've done in Carmel, we've placed 122 of our signalized intersections with roundabouts. Not only do we get an 80% increase, or decrease rather, in injury accidents, last year our city engineer estimated we saved about 28,000 tons of carbon. We're using city design principles to build a more walkable city. We do mixed-use zoning so that when people do have to make car trips, they're shorter trips. We've installed more than 200 miles of trails and paths. Since 2005, we required alternative fuel vehicles be purchased by city departments when available. This month, our police department announced that we're switching to 130 car fleet of renewables. I've got a little bit more, so I'm going to switch to the ask here, as I see I have only a few seconds left. We all know about revenue sharing and how it was a Nixon program, a Republican program. CDBG grant was a great example, program from the 1970s that's still around. We worked hard at the Conference of Mayors with you and with this committee to get the Energy Efficiency and Environmental Block Grant Program authorized. It was funded during the stimulus for the first time. We're asking that you do that again. It's a big country. All the cities have different needs. It's a great way to partner with the federal government, but yet with local decision-making, using that money where it can be best utilized for our citizens. We ask that you consider that. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much. We have now concluded witness opening statements for our second panel. We'll now move to member questions. I recognize myself for 5 minutes for questions, and I thank all of our mayors and the chair of the County Board of Commissioners for joining us and sharing their perspectives today. You most likely heard me ask our previous panel or guest, Governor Inslee, about what Congress can learn from your experiences as leaders. And I'm guessing your community was not as active doing this sort of clean energy or resilience work a decade ago. Why do you think that things have changed so much? Mayor?
So, Allen, Permian Basin, Midland, Texas, Odessa, Texas, our sister city. What we've learned from these oil and gas companies, which makes up probably about 90% of our industry out there, is technology. Technology, following these companies, seeing how they're advancing, how they are getting more efficient, has allowed them, yes.
Yeah, no, I just want you to just give me a quick answer here because
technology.
Okay. Mayor Biskupski.
Yeah, for us, it is truly about clean air. It's very difficult to breathe many days out of the year due to the inversion that we have. And so it's the #1 issue, regardless of party affiliation.
Okay. And let's hear from our other mayor, Mayor Brainerd. Why do you think things have changed so much?
I think for us it's about quality of life and being able to attract the best workforce possible from all over the world. Air quality, clean drinking water, clean air quality is important. It's important to us. It's important to our citizens.
In my opening statement, I stressed the need to empower local governments. Federal resources and technical assistance are important, but I believe we also need to include an appropriate level of flexibility. The conditions in Salt Lake City or Carmel or Seattle or even Amsterdam, New York, my hometown, vary dramatically. Does anyone have thoughts on the types of programs that offer the flexibility that local officials, our mayors, need to address their local conditions?
Mr. Chairman, if I may go back to what I said at the end of my comments, the Energy and Environmental Block Grant program is a wonderful idea. Pattern after CDBG, it works. We recognize we're a big country. Different cities, as you say, have different needs, but that federal partnership, federal money, but local decision-making within the broad category of environmental improvement, it works very well. We get to decide locally where it can best be utilized, how we can match it best with local dollars to have the greatest impact and do the greatest good.
And could you cite an example within your community in Carmel that
sure. During
made
those, thank
most
you.
benefit from that?
Sure. During the stimulus, Carmel received about $700,000 in an environmental and energy block grant. We used it to switch out most of our street lights to LED lights. We reduced, as a result of doing that, our energy consumption for those lights by close to 50%, and getting a return in excess of 10% in electricity savings on that investment. It's a lot better than we can do in the bank these days.
And Mayor Biskupski?
Yeah, similar experience for us in utilizing federal dollars. I will add, though, that in the long term, it would be very helpful if there was a bipartisan legislative act that was passed. So if you, in long term, do Energy Innovation and Carbon Dividend Act and you pass that, that's a long-term solution that would be very helpful and would create about 2.1 million new jobs and reduce our emissions by 40% in this country. Short term, though, I think the Energy Efficiency and Conservation Grant has been very helpful and should be renewed. The EPA Targeted Airshed Grant, Department of Energy Solar Cities Grant, or the Congestion Mitigation and Air Quality Improvement Program, all of which have helped our cities across this country.
In terms of the energy efficiency improvements, what would you cite in terms of gains that you made with some of those programs that you just mentioned?
Yeah, so on energy efficiency, we're shoring up opportunities with our buildings and our property owners. So what we are doing now is benchmarking, and that provides real transparency for property owners to see how they are measuring up in contributing to our air quality problem. And that tool in and of itself has been very helpful in showing to our property owners what is happening with their buildings and what they can do and how they can partner with our public utilities opportunities and the grants that they provide, and then also pull down some matching dollars.
Thank you. The chair now recognizes Mr. Shimkus, our Republican leader for the subcommittee, for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Again, we appreciate you all being here. And everybody wants their children or grandchildren to live in a community in which they have opportunities to grow. So I was touched by Archie and Jack and that focus. Yeah. But I want to ask Mayor Morales and Commissioner Camp, would Archie and Jack, are they better off now in your communities because of oil and gas development from the aspect of health, interactions, education, and future job opportunities? And can you give me some examples of that?
Yeah, most definitely, and thank you. It's, as I just alluded to, technology has really brought the oil company and been able to allow these companies to drill more effectively in a less time and more advanced manner, in the sense of between the city ordinances and the state ordinances, the Railroad Commission, you're seeing less and less rigs go up. So, good example, sitting with Apache Corporation, a large producer in Texas.
What about going to infrastructure, education? What's its help for the tax revenue based upon the local community and how that's improved just the everyday livelihood?
So then I'll just, because of the shale and because of the technology and the drilling, it has then brought these families that we are seeing a mass increase into our community, which means then those companies have to participate in helping us with road infrastructure. They're putting in their dollars in the healthcare system, into the environmental impacts. Building codes now are up into 2018 codes. So I would say that today, because of the oil companies and the impact that they're having in our community, it's a public-private partnership, and one that they know that their children are on the roads. one that they know the community cannot handle alone, and so their dollars are being participated on the infrastructure and utility work, in our school, our healthcare system, and knowing that that kind of partnership is what's going to make
And
us
let me follow up. In rural America, there's always a lot of concern about the first generation, second generation, they're leaving because there's no jobs available. Is that true for Midland?
Yeah, most definitely. For the longest time, we lost all of our younger generation. We were really a retirement community. Today, the average age is 31 in Midland. The millennials are moving in. We just saw our youngest voting block of 33-year-old females, and that's because of the quality of life. Quality of place is improving. Amenities are better. Education's starting to improve. Secondary schools. So schools, or these oil companies, are realizing that they are the ones that are making the impact, so they need to make that investment.
Yeah, let me go to Commissioner Camp. Same type of questions.
Yeah, as I stated in my testimony earlier, in the 1980s when the steel industry left Beaver County and left western Pennsylvania because of the emissions and the changes was one of the key driving factors to that. A lot of the educated individuals left western Pennsylvania to go work elsewhere. We're starting to see them come back now. We're working with different programs throughout the county, western PA. As the mayor said before, the public-private partnership that we have with the companies that are coming here, investing in Beaver County, not only in our infrastructure, not only in our municipalities and governments, they're also investing into our schools, our local colleges, our community college of Beaver County. They've invested more than $1 million to build a process technology center to educate the individuals who the governor said earlier don't necessarily have to go to a four-year school to have a good family-sustaining job, and these companies are investing in Beaver County and western PA.
Yeah, and I was just, I'm glad you added photos to your testimony, because here's a closed zinc plant or a zinc plant on the river, turned to a cleared off land now to this new, I guess, multiple thousands of people, labor, working to build this factory. And then also on the back, you had the water plant, from the old water plant that the only thing you could afford versus now what you can afford to provide for your constituents.
To talk about those two real briefly, the zinc plant, it was an Act II environmental program, and it when it was vastly improved to the existing site, they spent $80 million on bringing that up to code to where it needed to be. The water treatment facility was a $69 million project by this private-public partnership we have to be able to provide water for 100 years now for that one community. So, as I stated before, these companies are investing their money and their fortune into these municipalities and communities because they plan on being here for a long time and provide those jobs.
So it's safe to say that energy development and the livelihood of people who you represent are greatly benefited by that.
Absolutely, they are. And as the governor said earlier, those who suffer the most from air quality and any other emissions are the ones who are living in poverty under the bridges and by the roads. If we don't have these jobs in Beaver County or western PA or eastern Ohio or northern West Virginia, that poverty level is going to peak up as it did in the 1980s.
Mr. Morales, you'd agree?
I would wholeheartedly agree, and I would also say in the state of Texas, because of the Permian Shale, 35% of the severance tax that we submit is staying in the roads, infrastructures of all of Texas, not just the Permian Basin. So our shale, the production out there is impacting schools and infrastructure.
Thank you. I'll yield back my time. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
The gentleman yields back, and we now recognize the gentlelady from the state of California. Representative, you have 5 minutes.
Thank you. First, I want to start by thanking the panelists for being here today. I've been running back and forth, so I apologize if I ask some questions that have been asked already. I want to start with you, Mayor Brainerd. I understand that you're a Republican mayor, is that correct?
That is correct.
I understand that you have been working hard in your city to work on climate change, is that correct?
Yes.
A couple of years ago, you gave a quote to an article in Think Progress, and I'm going to ask you about it because my frustration is that sometimes when I talk to my colleagues on the other side of the aisle about climate change and working on this issue, there appears to just be the conversation of what we're having by some of our other guests and why it's important that we drill and why it's important that we do fracking and so on and so forth. I get the arguments that are made over there. And I'm really glad that this committee hearing is focused on why we need to address climate change and what you're doing on a local level. You had told Think Progress back then, I just want to make sure it's accurate. You said, and I quote, "Republicans have been intimidated to some degree by the Tea Party and the conservative talk show host on addressing climate change." And you went on to talk about how you do what's right for your constituents. And when you do that, that's the best thing to do. Do you stand by that comment? Only because I'm curious. I would love to just hear. Do you stand by that comment?
Yeah, I do. I think that a lot of these radio shows on, they have particular political persuasion. Some are liberal, some are conservative, but those commentators are sometimes out to make money and get listenership, and not always focused on finding solutions. And I'm frustrated with that, as I think a lot of us are. I think that, mayors don't have the leisure of having the sort of partisan politics that maybe those in state capitals or maybe those here in Washington do. We see our constituents in the grocery stores and the barber shops and on the street every day, and they don't care about partisan politics very much. They care about making sure the services that they're paying local taxes for are done. They care about the quality of life for their communities. They care about the future of their children. They care about the schools and the library systems. And they care about safe drinking water and clean air and what the world's going to be like for their descendants. I think being a mayor is probably one of the least partisan offices you can hold in the United States. We are kind of a joke at the Conference of Mayors. There's no Republican or Democratic way to plow snow or fill potholes.
Right.
And there really isn't.
Thank you for that. I had served on a local city council and served as a mayor and understand where you're coming from. I just want to applaud you in your efforts to think beyond the partisanship and think about what's right, not just for your constituents, but for America and for the future of this planet. I have a mayor that's not in my district, but somebody who I work very closely with. He's the mayor of Lancaster in California. His name is Rex Paris, Republican. And people tell me, they're like, "What are you doing? He's a conservative, he's a Republican." I said, you know what? He cares about climate change. He's acting on climate change. And I think that I applaud, because we need to make sure to come together. This should not be a partisan issue at all. This really is about the future of our children, their health, and the impacts. Some of the things they're doing down in Lancaster, I just want to highlight, because when I was on the city council, we actually went down to Lancaster to see what they were doing there, to figure out how can we do this in our own community. They have achieved their net zero energy status in 2016, which they define as producing more energy from sun or wind than they use. They have all electric buses in Lancaster. They make sure that every new home built is solar powered and affordable at that. It's the first city to require actually solar panels on every home. Now, I realize that different parts of the country are a little different, and maybe you can't get the same type of result that you would get in sunny California. But what I wanted just to highlight was that one is, it was great to see you here and great to see your testimony here. And maybe in my final seconds, can you maybe highlight or give us an idea of one of the things, a couple of things maybe you have done that you think Congress should consider in making, doing the same on our level so we can help address the climate change issue?
Would you like examples of what we've done in Carmel? I want to make sure I understand.
It's something you've done in your city that maybe we should look at as something we should implement on a national level to help fight climate change.
Well, I think there are great opportunities through the Highway Trust Fund, which funds local highway projects, to toughen up on how we design our cities. We've designed our cities in the United States so that the average person, including all the people that don't drive in big cities on the East Coast and Chicago, we've designed our cities so the average driver is spending 2 hours a day in their car. We can do better than that. And since so much of the money for building that highway system comes from the Highway Trust Fund, having a little stronger requirements that encourage better city design can make a big difference to those auto emissions that cause such a problem, for instance, in Salt Lake City. We've done that in Carmel. We have designed our center core with our runabouts, other traffic innovations, so the average commute in our city is 4 or 5 minutes, not 2 hours a day.
Representative Berrigan yields back, and we now go to the gentleman from the state of West Virginia, Representative McKinley, for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Looks like I'm batting cleanup here on this, so let's go. Just a quick note to Mayor Brainerd. 50 years ago, I graduated from Purdue. So I want to give a shout out to your Ryan Klein that got us an opportunity. That kid just shut the lights out that night. And
He did, didn't he? I'm a Butler graduate, but we still like Purdue.
You still have a chance for education.
That's right.
So the other, I want to go to camp because there's a concern I've had, and many of us are watching many of our political figures hiding behind climate change as an excuse to push an ideology. So, Commissioner Camp, let me point out some examples on it. Under the Commerce Clause, there are numerous challenges now around the country about this, because you just heard, you maybe heard Governor Inslee trying to prevent coal from being exported across the United States to be exported. We have a governor in Maryland preventing gas pipelines being constructed across Maryland, 3.5 miles long, 12 feet wide, and they're trying to prevent that from happening. We see New York fighting the Commerce Clause by preventing the pipeline construction up there to distribute gas. My concern comes back to you, because I'm from Wheeling, just down the road, just on the other end of that river, just come on around. If we can't ship our ethane, if governors and political figures are using various rules and regs to prevent the transportation, how are we going to get ethane to you at the cracker plant? How are we going to get coal transported up? How are we going to get gas up into New England when they have shortages? Do you sense, are you getting any sense that sometimes we're allowing our ideology to get ahead of us instead of science and the law to be able to allow our products to be shipped to market? Do you think they're hiding behind that?
I do. I think a lot of times, you have to let science play out, and you have to figure out how we're going to move the product from point A to point B. So we are seeing that. Fortunately, for the Shell petrochemical plant, they're running a 97-mile natural gas line directly to the plant, and we haven't run into that. But Mr. Johnson's and Congressman Johnson's district, he has a proposed petrochemical plant in Belmont County, Ohio. They might be running into that situation in the years to come. So I do believe so, yes, sir.
I'm just concerned about people who are hiding behind something. I ran out of time. I went 2 minutes over with Inslee, so but I wanted to challenge him on one statement, because he made, just to show how science is being twisted here a little bit, where he made a public comment that, what was his quote? "We're tired of breathing smoke from Mississippi." Now, I'm just an engineer from Purdue. I've never heard of the wind currents going from Mississippi up to state of Washington. Is there something I'm missing here, or is this just one more thing that people are trying to use an ideology?
I believe so, yes, sir. I think as Ranking Member Shimkus said earlier, we had studies in the past administration and go through. If we would have spent our time and energy focusing on how to help these other nations with their emissions, if you truly believe in global warming and climate change, it's a national thing. It's a world thing, not just a national thing. And if we focused our time, energy, finances, resources on helping the entire world and not just the United States, we'd be moving, to the future a little faster.
Can't agree with you more. I hope there is going to be more emphasis on the global involvement and how we get that. So I thank all of you for the panel, and I yield back my time.
Gentleman yields back. I request unanimous consent to enter the following items into the record. They include a report by the University of Montana entitled "The Economic Impact of the Early Retirement of Coal Strip Units 3 and 4, a letter from the mayor of Rock Falls, a Washington Post article from March 28th of 2019 entitled In small towns across the nation, the death of a coal plant leaves an unmistakable void. A report by Energy Innovation titled The Coal Cost Crossover, Economic Viability of Existing Coal Compared to New Local Wind and Solar Resources, the United States Climate Alliance's 2018 annual report, a New York Times article from March 29th of 2019 entitled They Grew Up Around Fossil Fuels, Now Their Jobs Are in Renewables, an article from KPAX titled Montana Senate Advances Bill to Aid Northwestern Purchase of Colstrip for Share, two articles from the Institute for Energy Research entitled China's New Environmental Problem, Battery Disposal, and the other, The Mounting Solar Panel Waste Problem, an article from Amnesty International entitled Amnesty Challenges Industry Leaders to Clean Up Their Batteries, and finally an article from engineering.com entitled Will Your Electric Car Save the World or Wreck It? With, a request for unanimous consent? Without objection, so ordered. I would like to thank all of our witnesses for their participation in today's hearing. I remind members that pursuant to committee rules, they have 10 business days by which to submit additional questions for the record to be answered by the witnesses who have appeared. I ask each witness to respond, please, and do so promptly to any such questions that you may receive. And at this time, the subcommittee is adjourned.